Hey there, fellow night travelers. I'm Ray, a truck driver with nearly 15 years on the road, and I've seen my fair share of strange things during long hauls. But this particular night in September was different. I was driving through the Rockies on Highway 12, that winding stretch between Idaho Springs and Georgetown. Tall pines lined the road, and rocky cliff overpasses cut through the landscape. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, with a classic rock station playing softly and a cool mist hanging near the tree line. Then I saw the light. Not just any light, this was something else entirely. Pure white, unnaturally bright, hanging about 100 feet off the ground to my right. At first I thought it might be a maintenance truck or another vehicle, but something felt off. No sound, no movement, just this steady, unwavering glow following the road's path. When I went under an overpass, the light vanished instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. I checked my mirrors, scanned the cab, but nothing was there. Then, just as quickly, the light reappeared on the other side of the overpass, exactly where it had been before. My trucker instincts kicked in. Maybe it was a trick of the winding road, a reflection, or my tired mind playing games. But this wasn't like a normal headlight. It didn't bob or weave, didn't speed up or slow down. It just followed, silent and steady, defying every logical explanation I could think of. Something was out there that night. Something I couldn't explain. I was driving through a narrow mountain road, cliffs on one side and thick forest on the other. No houses or businesses nearby, and mountain shadows deepened as fog started rolling in. The light caught my attention first when I noticed it keeping perfect pace with my truck, no matter how I adjusted my speed. Every time I went under an overpass, it would vanish for those few seconds, then reappear immediately after. I tried convincing myself it was just a maintenance drone or some new highway lighting system, but something felt off. I'd seen construction drones before, and they usually had blinking red lights. This was different, silent, steady, and solid. I pulled off at a turnout to stretch and get some air. Strangely, the light stayed on the road, waiting just past the last overpass. Looking around, I saw nothing. No trucks, no workers, just forest and rocks. I attempted to call dispatch to check for road work, but the signal dropped. Mountain dead zones, typical. When I got back in the truck and started driving, the light reappeared immediately. Now it was closer, maybe 50 feet off the ground, hovering perfectly in my passenger window view. It wasn't like any drone or vehicle light I'd seen before. A pure white orb, smooth and bright, with no flicker or surrounding glow. No sound at all, no mechanical hum, no buzzing, nothing. The silence was unnerving. My truck's engine was loud, so I knew I wasn't missing some subtle noise. I kept driving slower, constantly glancing over, searching for some explanation. A shadow, a frame, a wire, anything. But there was just that perfect circle of light. I felt watched, followed by something invisible. An inexplicable sensation that made me increasingly uneasy as I continued down the dark, foggy mountain road. I was working the overnight shift as a security guard at an isolated industrial site just outside Spokane, Washington. The chemical plant was fenced off, surrounded by dense forest, and eerily quiet at night. My job mostly involved sitting in the control room, watching monitors, checking doors, and doing rounds every couple hours. Most nights were mind-numbingly boring. This happened about 3 months ago, right as fall was settling in. Cold nights brought heavy air, thick with the smell of wet leaves and earth. Fog would sometimes roll in so dense it blurred the floodlights around the perimeter. I arrived at work around 10 p.m. and clocked in. Later, driving home through mountain roads, something strange happened. There was no sudden need to hit the brakes or swerve, just a deep creeping unease, like something didn't belong there, and I wasn't supposed to see it. When I reached the outskirts of town, the light vanished once I crossed beneath the last overpass where the highway flattened into normal streets and buildings. At a gas station, I tried telling the clerk what I'd experienced, but he just laughed it off, suggesting I'd seen a drone or a reflection. I didn't push it. Everyone who drives these mountain roads probably has stories they don't mention. The rest of my trip was uneventful. I kept checking my mirrors but saw nothing else. I figured I'd chalk it up to fatigue or some weird optical illusion. The next day, I searched online for reports about strange lights or drone tests in the area. Nothing. No news. no social media chatter. I even called the highway patrol, and they confirmed no scheduled activities for that stretch that night. I don't know what I saw. Whatever it was didn't make a sound or move like any machine I've ever known. It just stayed there, following me under the overpasses, then disappearing when the road hit it. Since then, I've driven that road several times, but the light never showed up again. It feels odd to say, but I still think about it sometimes. That silent, steady white light hanging just off the road, keeping pace with me like it was waiting or watching. Every time I drive through those overpasses, I remember it blinking out just before I passed beneath, then popping back on right after. Nothing about it made sense. Nothing explained why it followed me or why it vanished under the overpasses. It was real though, and I can't quite figure out why. The night shift was dragging on, quiet except for machinery's constant hum and occasional metal creaks in the cool air. Around 3 a.m., my eyes were getting heavy as I scrolled through camera feeds and half listened to maintenance crew radio chatter. Suddenly, at exactly 3:12 a.m., something strange happened. Every single motion-triggered camera on the main screen lit up simultaneously, which was bizarre since nothing had moved for hours before. Initially, I thought it might be a system glitch, but the simultaneous activation across all cameras was too precise. When I hit the playback button, expecting to see a stray animal or misplaced worker, I found only static. Pure white noise. No blurry shapes, no shadows, just blank screens. I refreshed the feed multiple times and checked system logs. Everything confirmed the sensors had triggered and cameras attempted recording, yet somehow no images appeared. Switching between different camera angles yielded the same result, pure static. The timestamp remained locked at 3:12 a.m., with no signs of movement anywhere. My supervisor dismissed it as a technical error when I called, telling me to monitor the situation. Unconvinced, I decided to conduct a physical inspection. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped into the foggy night. Cold air enveloped me, and my light's beams struggled to penetrate the thick mist. Walking the perimeter slowly, I strained my ears for any sound beyond my footsteps and the distant plant's background noise. Everything appeared normal. Security gates were locked, fences intact, no footprints or disturbed branches suggested any intrusion. Yet the earlier camera static nagged at me. Back in the control room, new oddities emerged. The digital wall clock flickered erratically, seconds jumping between 3:11 and 3:13. Monitors displayed a subtle, almost imperceptible shimmer as if struggling to maintain their image. I rebooted the system, and after a few minutes, cameras returned to normal. No static, no flickering. But something had changed. The room's quiet, it felt heavier, like the fog had followed me inside. I remained alert for the rest of my shift, unsettled by the unexplained events. The night shift had been uneventful since the first strange incident. I checked with my coworkers, but no one else had noticed anything unusual during their shifts. The maintenance logs confirmed no scheduled activity around 3 a.m. It was as if the event had occurred in complete isolation. My curiosity kept me watching the cameras at 3:12 a.m. in the weeks that followed, but nothing triggered again. Yet, when the fog rolled in thick, I'd catch fleeting moments that made me doubt my senses. The monitors would twitch, static would flicker, or a shadow would dart across the screen. But whenever I looked directly, everything appeared normal. The job was wearing on me. I'd considered quitting multiple times. The isolation was getting to me, and that static incident had shaken me more than I'd like to admit. But the pay was decent, and I didn't have other options lined up. About 2 weeks later, something happened again. This time was different. The entire camera system went completely dark for 10 solid seconds before flickering back to life. When the feeds returned, the motion-triggered cameras were off. No static, just blank black screens. That familiar hollow feeling returned, and I rushed outside with my flashlight, heart racing. The fog was heavier than ever, obscuring everything beyond the fence line. I spent nearly an hour scanning the woods, finding nothing. No sounds, no movement, just an oppressive silence pressing in around me. Back inside, something was immediately off. My coffee cup wasn't the one I'd brought. Instead, an old chipped mug with a faded logo sat on the desk, a mug I'd never seen before. I asked Dan, the day guard, if he'd been in the control room or brought in new mugs. He looked at me like I was losing my mind and insisted he'd only wipe down the desk. Strange occurrences became more frequent. The clock would blink unexpectedly. Screens would freeze momentarily. Static would appear and disappear at random. The fog outside seemed to grow thicker and closer each night, almost as if it were alive and creeping in. Near the end of one shift, I heard something that sent chills down my spine. Muffled voices through the radio. Soft whispers just beyond comprehension. I called out, but no one answered. I've been into amateur radio since I was a kid, and this night was like any other. My name's Caleb, and I have a simple setup in the basement of my small house on the edge of rural Vermont. Just a transceiver hooked up to a homemade antenna on the roof. Nothing fancy, but it's my hobby and a way to escape the usual chaos. Late April brought a cool, clear evening. The air smelled of fresh earth and damp leaves. My dog was curled up beside the desk as I settled in around 10 p.m. to scan the HF bands. Everything felt normal until just after 11 p.m. That's when I started hearing it. At first, a faint clicking, almost easy to miss, but steady. The clicks weren't random. They came in a perfect rhythm. 3 clicks spaced evenly, 10, then a pause of about 11 seconds before repeating exactly. I checked my equipment thinking it might be interference, but all my gear was clean. The signal came in clearly, without distortion. These clicks were sharp like Morse code, but no letters or words emerged. I adjusted the frequency, curious about the source. The pattern continued, 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks, pause, over and over. Weeks later, I was still haunted by what I'd heard. I kept reviewing the footage, logs, and systems, but nothing explained the experience. It felt like something was there, just out of reach, hidden in the gaps between the cameras and the fog. When I tried to report it through the radio channel, no one answered. The static grew thicker, and then the SIS-TEM cutout. I double-checked the radio and found nothing wrong. Dan, who was on the next shift, heard nothing. The cameras never showed anything but static when they were supposed to capture movement at 3:12 a.m., especially on those late nights when the fog settles thick around the plant. I can't shake the feeling that I'm not really alone out here. The radio crackled with an eerie, mechanical rhythm. For 40 minutes, I tracked the signal's precision. 3 distinct clicks repeating every 11 seconds. Absolutely consistent. Not a millisecond off. I grabbed my Nook and started timing the intervals, trying to call out on the frequency. Silence answered. Switching bands yielded nothing. The clicks remained isolated, broadcasting quietly like something was waiting. Midnight found me outside checking the antenna. The night was clear and still. Sharp stars hung in a dark sky, no planes or satellites moving overhead. Just distant traffic's soft hum and occasional tree rustles. I returned inside and fired up the spectrum analyzer. No obvious signal spike or modulation accompanied the clicks. Just 3 sharp, deliberate taps repeating with mechanical precision. A strange anticipation built inside me, like something was about to happen, but nothing changed. At 11:40, the clicks stopped abruptly. Complete silence. Static filled the channel. I sat frozen, fingers on the dial, waiting for the pattern to restart. It didn't. My mind raced with possibilities. A test signal? An experimental transmitter? Some unknown digital communication? I scoured radio forums and online resources. No explanations emerged. I discussed the incident with fellow ham radio operators. Reactions varied. Some suggested interference or a faulty device. Others simply shrugged. Nobody could explain the perfect timing or why the signal appeared so briefly and precisely. Days later, I returned to the same frequency at the same time. Nothing. Just static and background noise. I kept listening on subsequent nights, hoping for a repeat, but the mysterious clicks never returned. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, I think I catch the faintest echo of those 3 precise taps. The night sky was perfect that night in my tiny Oregon town. I'm Jamie, 17, and with the windows locked tight by my parents, sneaking out is always a challenge. But the stars were calling me. Around 11:30 p.m., I carefully slipped out my bedroom window, making sure not to wake anyone. My dog was nowhere around to give me away. With my small telescope in hand, I headed to the open farmland behind our house. No streetlights meant the stars would be incredibly bright. The early summer air still carried a hint of spring's coolness. I set up near the edge of the field, where grass meets the dirt road, and began scanning the sky. I was searching for constellations and satellites, and at first, everything seemed normal. The usual spread of stars twinkled, with a faint glow from the nearby town. But after about 20 minutes, something felt off. The crickets had gone completely silent, unusual for that time of night. Even the breeze had stopped, and the silence felt unnaturally heavy, as if the air was holding its breath. Then I saw it. What I initially thought was a cloud turned out to be something entirely different. A massive black triangle hung in the sky, blocking out the stars. It wasn't a cloud with edges or texture, but a solid shape that seemed to have cut a piece right out of the night. Completely black and void of any light, it moved slowly overhead with an eerie smoothness. What struck me most was the absolute silence. No hum, no engine noise, nothing. Just this dark shape gliding across the sky. Later, I'd find myself haunted by a strange sound, clicks that echoed in my mind like a distant, steady heartbeat. I couldn't tell if it was a machine, a radio phenomenon, or something else entirely. The sound had filled the room that night, precise and consistent, then vanished. I still don't understand what it meant, but now I keep my radio on at night, hoping it might return. Maybe someday it will. I sat outside with my telescope watching the night sky when something completely unusual caught my eye. A massive dark shape moved across the stars, perfectly level, almost like it was floating. It was so dark that tracking it through the telescope was nearly impossible. This wasn't like anything normal in the sky. The object absorbed starlight instead of reflecting it, with razor-sharp edges that remained completely straight. It didn't move like a plane or drone, too slow and steady, with no blinking lights or recognizable features. Just a huge shadow gliding silently overhead. My heart raced because I knew this wasn't something ordinary. Part of me wanted to run inside and lock the door, but I couldn't look away. I wished I could call someone, but my phone was dead. Typical bad timing. The triangle-shaped object moved gradually from northwest to southeast, covering about half the sky in around 5 minutes. Then suddenly it vanished. One moment it was blocking out stars, the next, completely gone. No sound, no flash, just disappeared. I sat frozen, trying to understand what I'd witnessed. The surrounding environment seemed normal again. Stars twinkling, crickets chirping, a light breeze returning. I packed up my telescope slowly, constantly glancing around, half expecting the shape to reappear. Back inside, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Was it a hallucination? But the shape felt too solid, too real. Something felt like it was watching, waiting. Something that didn't want to be seen, but was definitely present. I never told anyone. Who would believe such a story? My friends talk about parties and social media trends. But every night after that, I found myself looking up, hoping for some explanation, some sign. Nothing ever happened again. Just that one silent, mysterious black shape moving across the sky. Here's the rewritten text. My retirement brought me to this quiet corner of Nevada about 6 years back. Roy's the name, and after years of contracting work, I wanted something far from city noise. Just a mile from my place sits a dry lake bed, miles of flat, cracked earth stretching out under an endless sky, usually empty and silent. Most nights are unremarkable, but for the past couple years, something strange has been happening out there. Not every single night, but with an almost mechanical precision. Always at 2:33 a.m. sharp. I discovered it by pure chance. One sleepless night around 2:30, I grabbed my old binoculars from the nightstand and peered out the window. That's when I first saw it, a tiny, faint light on the lake bed. Not like a flashlight or anything typical, just a pale, hazy glow about as bright as a distant street lamp, but completely motionless. At first, I thought maybe someone was camping or a vehicle had broken down. But there were no sounds, no engines, no voices, no movement, and just a minute later, the light was gone. The next night, I set an alarm to see if it would happen again. Right on schedule at 2:33, the light reappeared in the exact same spot. Through my binoculars, it was barely a pinprick hovering just above the cracked ground. No flickering, no movement, just hanging there like a star dropped onto the earth. I'd watch for about 10 minutes. Nothing would change. Then suddenly, it would vanish, like someone had flipped a switch. After several nights, I started keeping a log, setting my alarm, grabbing the binoculars, watching. Sometimes it appeared, sometimes not. But when it did, always at 2:33, not a minute earlier or later. Sometimes I wonder if it was some secret military test or a weather phenomenon I couldn't comprehend. But it's burned into, my memory now. This silent light moving slowly across the stars, disappearing like it never existed, making me feel like the night isn't quite as empty as I once thought. The dry lake bed was eerily consistent in its oddity. Dead center, with no roads or trails nearby, just flat, cracked mud unmarked by any human presence. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. One late spring night around 2:15 a.m., I decided to investigate. With a flashlight and binoculars, I drove out and reached the lake bed's edge by 2:25. I positioned myself facing the usual spot where the light appears and settled in, feeling the rough earth beneath me. Complete silence surrounded me, broken only by my breathing and occasional rustling from nearby scrub. Then, precisely at 2:33, the light materialized, pale and faint, but this time closer than ever before. Hovering just inches above the ground, about 100 feet away, it remained completely still. Curious, I swept my flashlight across it, expecting to reveal some rational explanation. Instead, something bizarre happened. The light didn't flicker or react. When my beam touched it, the glow seemed to absorb the light, as if it weren't truly solid. A chill ran down my spine. Unsettled, I decided against getting closer. I watched for 10 minutes until the light vanished without warning, leaving me with an uneasy feeling of having witnessed something unexplainable. Afterward, strange occurrences became routine. Around 2:30 a.m., my home's power would briefly flicker. My emergency CB radio would occasionally pick up unusual static, a soft whisper or low clicking that would mysteriously cut out before 2:33. When I mentioned these experiences to my neighbor Mike, a local history enthusiast, he was initially skeptical, but he recalled stories from older residents about similar unexplained lights over the lake bed, glimpsed only momentarily over decades. Something was definitely happening out there, though what exactly remained a complete mystery. Out here in the middle of nowhere, the landscape is a remnant of old military testing grounds from the 50s and 60s. Nobody's stuck around long term, the terrain's too harsh and unforgiving. But something keeps catching my eye. Night after night, I'd watch this faint light. It never changed, no movement, no sound. Just a quiet glow that would appear and vanish. Precise, consistent. About a month in, something shifted. While scanning with my binoculars, I caught a shadow near the lake bed's edge. Not human-shaped, but moving with an unsettling deliberateness, like something was pacing, circling. When I blinked, it disappeared. Complete silence. That's when things started getting to me. Some nights, I'd wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I just seeing things because of the isolation? But then the light would return, right on schedule, pulling me back into its strange rhythm. The final encounter was a couple weeks back. I'd just finished checking some house wiring and the clock read 2:32. I grabbed my binoculars and settled by the window. At 2:33, the familiar glow appeared exactly where it always did. This time felt different, though. It seemed to linger, almost hesitating before vanishing. I woke up feeling exhausted, like I hadn't truly slept. No strange memories, just a foggy sensation clouding my mind. What's happening out there? I've ruled out every logical explanation. Reflections, drones, campers. It's too calculated to be random, yet not threatening. I've considered reporting it, but who would believe me? A light that appears at 2:33 a.m. on an empty lake bed, consistently showing up for years. They'd dismiss me as another crazy desert dweller. So I keep watching. Not every night, but often enough. Binoculars ready, waiting for 2:33. The light comes and goes with mechanical precision. Quiet, distant. I'm just waiting to understand. Does it mean something, or nothing at all? The Saturday morning was just like any other in late October, with Vermont's rural landscape draped in a thin, low-hanging fog. Before dawn, the sky hung in that deep gray-blue shade that precedes sunrise. I was walking Milo, my dog, down our usual route, past the abandoned Miller farm and through the open field connecting our road to the wood's edge. Milo loved this spot because he could run free, and that morning started typically enough. He chased his ball through the dew-covered grass, the horizon blending into misty nothingness. The distant tree line was barely visible through the thick fog. Near the property fence, something caught my attention. A strange shape hovered about 100 yards away, suspended maybe 6 or 7 feet above the ground. It wasn't moving, just existing in that space. Initially, I thought it might be a weather balloon or some forgotten farm equipment, but it didn't resemble anything familiar. The object was oval, roughly the size of a small car, with a peculiar surface. It looked simultaneously dull and shiny, like a matte chrome coating that defied normal reflection. No sunlight seemed to interact with it in any expected way. Milo's behavior was what truly unnerved me. Typically energetic and pulling at the leash, he now sat completely still. His ears were perked, eyes locked onto the shape with an intensity I'd never seen before. When I called his name or tried tugging the leash, he remained motionless, planted firmly in place. An eerie silence had descended. The usual morning sounds, bird calls, wind rustling, distant tractors had vanished. The world seemed to have quieted specifically around this mysterious shape. Standing there, I wondered if exhaustion or an overactive imagination was playing tricks on me. But something felt different, undeniably strange. During our morning walk, something strange happened in the fog-covered field. A shape stood out, unnaturally clear and solid, unlike the blurry landscape around it. Milo, my dog, seemed unusually tense, his behavior more alert than usual. I glanced away for just a moment to check my watch. When I looked back, the shape had vanished completely. No sound accompanied its disappearance, no rustling, no movement, nothing. The fog continued rolling across the field as if nothing had happened, with no trace of whatever I'd seen. Milo was visibly shaken. His tail hung low, and he kept looking back at the empty spot where the shape had been. We finished our walk faster than normal, and I tried to rationalize what I'd witnessed. Maybe it was just a trick of light, or some piece of debris I hadn't properly noticed. Later that day, I mentioned the incident to my neighbor Hank, who grew up in the area. His reaction surprised me. He looked skeptical, asking if I might have seen a phone reflection. But I knew I hadn't been using my phone, and Milo's reaction seemed too genuine to ignore. In the days that followed, I watched the field carefully during our morning walks. Nothing unusual appeared. The fog rolled in, crows called from old trees, and everything seemed normal. Yet sometimes, when the fog was thick, I'd get an unsettling feeling of being watched. Milo's ears would twitch, and he'd stare intently at what seemed to me to be empty space. I asked Hank about local stories of strange occurrences. He mentioned only vague legends about unexplained lights and sounds that nobody took seriously. The memory of that silent, hovering shape and Milo's frozen reaction made me hesitate to investigate further at night. To this day, I'm uncertain about what I saw that morning. It was silent, motionless, and disappeared without explanation, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of mystery. During the summer of 2019, I was working as a park ranger at Mount Pisgah State Park in Oregon. My job mostly involved routine tasks like patrols, maintenance checks, and occasional guided hikes. Nothing out of the ordinary. One early July morning, around 5 a.m., my supervisor called me to investigate something in a restricted area. This section of the park was off limits due to sensitive bird nesting sites and erosion risks. The main trail ended about half a mile short of my destination, so I had to navigate an old service road through dense forest. Thick fog blanketed the landscape, limiting visibility to just 20 feet. Damp air carried the scent of wet pine and earth. I carried my standard gear: boots, radio, flashlight, and notebook. The radio remained quiet except for routine morning check-ins, and no other rangers were on duty in the area. After hiking through a patch of fir and cedar trees, I entered an unmapped clearing. There in the middle was something extraordinary. A perfect 10-foot circular patch of grass completely scorched, black, and brittle. What made this scene bizarre was the complete absence of fire damage anywhere else. Surrounding trees and shrubs looked untouched, with no singed bark or leaves and no hint of smoke. Curious, I knelt and examined the circle's edges. The soil underneath was dry and cracked, but not in a way that suggested recent burning. It was as if the grass had been incinerated without the fire ever reaching the ground. I carefully circled the clearing, searching for any signs of human activity: cigarette butts, campfires, footprints, but found nothing. The ground remained undisturbed. I radioed dispatch, reporting my location and describing the scene. I asked if any controlled burns were scheduled in the area. Their response was clear. The park had been quiet, with no fire reports or unusual incidents. Some things defy explanation, and this was definitely one of them. Milo wasn't imagining anything. Sometimes you just have to accept that not everything can be neatly understood or rationalized. The morning fog made everything look washed out, but the circle in the clearing was unmistakable, perfectly round, like someone had used a giant stencil to burn the grass inside. It didn't look natural at all. I spent about 20 minutes checking the perimeter, and the longer I stood there, the more uneasy I became. The silence was eerie. No birds, no insects, not even a whisper of wind. Forests are usually buzzing with life in the early morning, but this place was dead quiet. Then I started hearing a faint humming. At first, I thought my radio was acting up, but it was off. The sound seemed to be coming from the ground itself, low and constant. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the fog or my imagination, but the sensation made my skin crawl. Quickly, I packed up and left, constantly glancing back at the clearing. Over the next few days, I returned with other rangers during daylight hours. The circle remained, grass scorched black, ground dry and cracked, with no ash or burnt branches. Just a clean, perfect ring. Mark, one of the rangers, joked it might be a lightning strike, but I knew that wasn't possible. No recent storms, and lightning doesn't create such a tidy pattern. The strangest part came when we checked our GPS. The coordinates were consistently off by hundreds of feet. We recalibrated multiple times, but the readings never matched our actual location. It was like the spot itself was shifting, or the instruments were malfunctioning. We fenced off the entire area, blocking public access. I reviewed the park's perimeter cameras, but nothing unusual showed up. No humans, no animals large enough to cause such damage. About a week later, during a routine patrol near the restricted zone, I was logging some notes when a quick flash of light caught my eye through the trees. I stopped and stared, but it vanished the moment I turned to look. The circle was always there, perfect and scorched, sitting silent among the trees. I couldn't figure out what it was. The grass was burned, but not like a normal fire. No smoke, no crackling. Soil tests came back clean, ruling out chemical spills. I stopped bringing it up at work because it made me feel uneasy, like I was seeing something I shouldn't. During my shifts, the clearing felt different depending on the time of day. Sometimes thick fog would roll in, other times it was completely clear. The silence, the humming, the weird GPS readings, and flickering lights all seemed connected. I'd gone out there by myself a few times, always noticing that strange circle. One night, while filling out my shift report, the power in the ranger station flickered for a few seconds. It seemed related somehow. Park management told me to keep an eye on things and report any changes, but no one else seemed to care or notice. Now, whenever I drive past that section of the park, I can't help but glance toward the trees. I wonder if the circle is still there, if it's moved, or if it's waiting for something. I have no answers. We were just killing time that night, 4 of us packed into Tanner's beat-up Subaru. It was early July, maybe 3 years ago, driving west on Route 2 between Alliance and Ellsworth, Nebraska. Pure middle-of-nowhere territory. Hot even after dark, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes vinyl seats uncomfortable. Lacey suggested stargazing near the sand hills away from town lights, and Tanner was always game for a drive. Drew and I didn't really care, so we went along. We had a cooler with drinks, a Bluetooth speaker, and a couple blankets to sit on. The sky was crystal clear, no clouds, just stars overhead and a low amber moon rising behind us. You could see roads stretching for miles with no headlights in front or behind. We'd been driving about an hour when we first saw the lights. Lacey suddenly pointed out the window. "Is that a plane?" We all leaned over to look. A line of 5 small white lights hovered above the fields, perfectly straight and evenly spaced, hanging low, maybe 100 feet off the ground. Drew noticed something odd from the back seat. "Those aren't blinking," he said, and they weren't. No navigation lights, no strobes, just steady white dots suspended in place. Tanner instinctively slowed down, and we watched intently. At first, the lights seemed frozen, like lanterns suspended in midair. Then they began to glide forward, not up, not down, just moving smoothly and silently. They paced alongside us, staying just off the road's right side. I rolled down the window, expecting to hear an engine or rotor noise. Nothing. Just wind, tires, and distant cicadas. Too low for a plane, Lacey said. Too still, Drew added. Tanner remained silent, his eyes alternating between the road and the mysterious lights. We watched for what felt like an eternity, maybe a minute or two. Then something strange happened. The rightmost light simply blinked out, as if someone had flipped a switch. Not dimming, not drifting, just gone. 10 seconds later, the next light disappeared, then the next. Each vanished left to right in 5-second intervals. The final light closest to the road was the last to go. Suddenly the sky was empty. Tanner pulled over, gravel crunching. We stepped out into complete silence. Insects hummed in the grass. Power lines buzzed faintly in the distance. Lacey pointed to where the lights had been. They were right there, right? I nodded, confirming the spot near a line of fence posts. Drew wandered into the grass, scanning the sky. Maybe drones, he suggested after a while, but no one responded. Something about the experience felt different, the symmetry, the unnatural stillness. It didn't feel like drones at all. We got back in the car after standing there for 5 minutes, not really knowing what we were waiting for. Tanner's, "Aid, let's keep moving," and we drove on without music. The speaker stayed on but silent. Lacey kept glancing out the window. Drew stared straight ahead. I watched the sky, wondering about Tanner's thoughts. His face was unreadable, flat, but he drove slower now, like something might suddenly appear. About 15 minutes later, Tanner pulled off at an old turnout with a rusted gate and a faded, "No trespassing" sign. He killed the engine, and that deep, empty silence of being far from town settled around us. "Let's just sit here for a while," he said. Nobody objected. We got out and spread our blankets in the grass, not for comfort, but to look up. The night was perfect for stargazing. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a dusty ribbon. I spotted a satellite. Lacey pointed out a shooting star. For a moment, things felt almost normal. Then Drew broke the calm. "Wait, what's that?" He pointed straight up at a small white light, moving steadily across the sky, higher than the previous ones. I thought it was a satellite at first, but then it did something impossible. It stopped completely. No drifting, no fading, just a sudden halt. After about 10 seconds, it made a perfect 90-degree turn and started moving sideways at a sharp angle before vanishing. We all saw it, no one spoke. We waited another 20 minutes, but nothing else happened. Tanner said he was ready to go, and no one argued. The drive back was silent. Even Lacey, usually talkative, remained quiet. We ended up at McDonald's in Alliance, eating fries in the parking lot, trying to act like the night had been completely ordinary. Days later, I asked Tanner if he'd seen anything like that before. He said no, but mentioned his dad, a former lineman in the Sandhills, had once told him about strange, silent lights over the prairie, though he never went into detail. Late October 2019 was just another night at Epley Airfield in Omaha. I'd been working radar operations there for over 6 years, and this shift was typical, cold but clear with just a few high clouds drifting in from the west. Light traffic. A couple commercial arrivals, a FedEx departure, and some private jets from Council Bluffs. I was alone on radar duty. This wasn't unusual. We often rotated solo shifts. Lynn, my coworker, was doing a routine perimeter fence inspection while I watched the scopes and sipped some terrible coffee. Then something strange happened. Around 8:40 p.m., a ping appeared just west of the Missouri River near Elkhorn. A single quick sweep on the screen, then gone. At first, I thought it was a reflection. That happens sometimes with weather conditions or terrain. But then it popped up again, slightly north. 2 sweeps this time, then silence. I logged the contact, unknown. No transponder, no altitude, intermittent visual track, standard procedure. But things got weird fast. 4 minutes later, it showed up east of the river, outside Omaha's Class C boundary. The speed was extraordinary, fighter jet fast with no transponder code. I tried calling on the emergency frequency, no response. From 850 to 907, this object appeared 7 times on my scope, never in the same place. North of the airport, then south, then toward Bellevue, once over the river. Each appearance lasted just a second or two. The movements defied explanation. Some distances were over 20 miles apart, covered in under 10 seconds. Impossible speeds. Afterward, I never found any record. No news articles, no air traffic reports, nothing online. It was like it didn't happen, except we knew it did. Those lights blinking out, one by one, as if someone was switching them off. I still think about that night. I noticed something strange during my shift. There were these flickering blips on the radar with zero altitude data, no ID, no squawk. I started screen recording, which isn't strictly allowed but happens when something unusual occurs. Around 9:10, I called the supervisor desk. Daryl, an older ex-Air Force guy, was on duty. When I explained the intermittent, unidentifiable, non-transponding object moving erratically, he paused before asking how long I'd been watching. I said about 30 minutes. His response was curt, "Okay, keep logging. No further action." I suggested notifying Offutt Air Force Base, but he dismissed the idea, saying they'd see it if needed. Something about his answer felt rehearsed. The object vanished after 9:12, leaving nothing on the scope for nearly an hour. I ran system diagnostics and checked antenna status. Everything appeared normal. When Lynn returned from her walk around 10:30, I described the incident. Her reaction was oddly casual. Was it the river again? When I emphasized its erratic movement, she grew quiet. "We get stuff like that maybe once or twice a year," she eventually said. "They tell us not to chase it." When I pressed her about who they were, she just shrugged, suggesting it could be supervisors, FAA personnel, or military. At home after my midnight shift, I transferred the screen recording to a USB. The 24-minute recording was mostly empty, with the object appearing briefly in 6 or 7 moments. Reviewing the footage, I noticed the track lines were jagged and inconsistent, almost as if skipping. The radar system isn't designed for such fast-moving targets at those angles. One moment particularly struck me. The object jumped from over Fort Calhoun to east of Pelion in about 5 seconds, a distance of nearly 30 miles. The next night, I discovered my logbook entry had vanished. I always write in blue ink, but the page was now entirely in black. When I asked Daryl about it, he suggested I'd forgotten to write the entry, or that the page might have been torn. Neither explanation rang true. We were camped out near Black Mesa, just west of the Colorado-New Mexico border, at the end of September. The weather was warm during the day, but dropped hard at night. No cell reception, barely any light pollution, a perfect spot to stargaze. 5 of us made the trip. Me, my cousin Nathan, his girlfriend Emily, and our friends Felix and Dan. 3 tents, a fire pit made from scavenged rocks, and nothing fancy. We'd hiked about 3 miles off a dirt access road, carrying our gear in packs. The plan was 2 nights away from everything. The first day and night went smoothly. We hiked a bit, made dinner on the fire, drank cheap beer, and passed around some weed. Around 10 p.m., we laid out on the rocks and watched the sky. Nathan, who's into astronomy, pointed out Saturn and a few constellations. I had my Casio watch set to atomic time, and Nathan and Emily had digital watches too. We checked them all that first night, just out of habit. They were identical to the second. I turned in around midnight, sleeping alone in my tent on a foam pad. I remember waking up cold around 2:30 and pulling my hoodie over my face. Nothing seemed unusual. Desert nights are freezing. The next thing I knew, I was awake with an intense pressure behind my eyes and blood on my upper lip. I sat up, wiped at my nose, and saw red. It wasn't gushing, just a slow nosebleed typical of dry air. But something felt off. It burned, and there was a strange metallic taste, almost like ozone, hard to describe. That same night, our radar system was rebooted at 2 a.m., which is rare unless there's a firmware update or a fault. I checked the update log. No update had been pushed after that. Nothing else happened. No new blips, no odd readings. Everything went back to normal. I still have the screen recording, and I've watched it 100 times. The blips don't follow any standard flight pattern. They don't even curve. They just jump point to point clean, like skipping a stone across the screen. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in our airspace, and it didn't act like anything I've ever tracked. I stepped outside for water, and everything felt wrong. The air was unnaturally still, no bugs, no wind, just absolute silence. The sky was a deep black scattered with stars, but something was off. The Big Dipper was missing, which struck me as odd. I always look for it automatically, and this time it just wasn't there. My watch backlight showed 6:12 a.m., but the sky looked like the middle of the night. The campsite was completely quiet. no movement in any of the tents. I checked the fire pit, just cold ash with the faintest glow under a few coals. No signs anyone else was awake. Back in my tent, I grabbed my phone from my backpack to double-check the time, but it wouldn't turn on. Dead battery. My backup flashlight was the same, even though I knew it was fully charged before we left. I stood there, my nose still bleeding slightly, trying to make sense of everything. Physically, I felt strange. Like jet lag, or maybe altitude sickness. Though we weren't that high up. My balance was off. The ground seemed to have a slight tilt. Every time I shifted my weight, I had to catch myself. I sat on a rock about 10 feet from camp and waited. The sun finally started rising around 5:50, according to the other watches. Mine still showed past 6:30. When everyone began to wake up, I watched silently at first. Emily asked about the time. Nathan said 6:04 on his watch. Mine showed 6:45. "Your watch is fast," Nathan said. "No," I replied, "it was synced last night." I showed him the sync screen, which confirmed the update before we left. There's no signal out here, so it couldn't have changed on its own. Nathan suggested I must have bumped something, but I've worn this watch for years. It doesn't just shift forward 41 minutes randomly. I asked if anyone else had experienced anything unusual. Dan slept soundly. Felix mentioned a slight headache, attributing it to the whiskey. When I finally brought up my nosebleed and the time discrepancy, they mostly shrugged it off, blaming dry air and campfire smoke. Something felt fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't explain what. That night in Joshua Tree was eerily quiet. I was alone, parked just off the road near Keys View, far from the main overlook. Around 2:30 in the morning, the desert was completely still. You could hear every grain of sand shifting under your boots. I'm Danny, by the way, from Hempt, and I've been playing around with night sky photography for about a year. Usually I go with friends, but that weekend everyone bailed, so I decided to go solo. I hiked maybe 10 minutes up a flat ridge, no real trail, just boulders and open scrub. Not technically supposed to camp there, but I wasn't setting up a tent, just planning to shoot for a few hours and head home before dawn. My gear was set up to capture long exposures of the Milky Way, mostly for practice. I wasn't a professional, just someone who enjoyed experimenting. I'd been taking shots for about 45 minutes when something felt off. Even before looking through the camera, something seemed strange. The day had been subtly weird. Birds unusually quiet, a dead rabbit we'd found earlier looking oddly pristine with no bugs or smell. That night with Nathan, something had been lingering in my mind. When I reviewed the time-lapse later, a single frame at 3:17 caught my attention. The stars were sharp and still, but a faint, perfectly horizontal blur crossed the middle of the shot. Not a plane trail or satellite, just a soft, almost imperceptible line of light. The next frame, 30 seconds later, showed nothing unusual, the sky back to normal. I showed Nathan the photo the next morning, but he dismissed it as a lens flare. I didn't argue. When we got back to the cars and I synced my watch, it had jumped back exactly 41 minutes. Not 40, not 42, but precisely 41. To this day, I've never understood why. During a 25-second exposure, I was stretching my back and looking up when something unusual caught my eye. A single point of light, slightly brighter than the surrounding stars, began to move. This wasn't like the familiar satellites or meteors I'd been watching. The movement was slow and smooth, without the blinking of a plane or the trail of a meteor. For about 10 seconds it traveled in a straight line, then abruptly turned at a perfect 90-degree angle. It was as if something was tracing the edges of a grid. I initially thought it might be a satellite adjusting its orbit, but then it turned again, another precise right angle that seemed to outline an invisible square. Quickly, I tried to capture it with my camera, pulling it off the tripod and pointing upward. But by the time I focused, the light had stopped moving, just hanging motionless in the sky. As I stood there, camera dangling, something even stranger happened. The light began moving again, this time diagonally, then turning with the same deliberate precision. Its motion was nothing like a typical celestial object. It wasn't following the Earth's curvature, but moving in rigid geometric patterns, as if someone were methodically drawing on graph paper. For 3 or 4 minutes I watched this pattern repeat, moving, stopping, turning. There was no sound, no trail, just a silent, steady motion. I attempted a long exposure shot to capture its path, but before the shutter could close, it vanished. Not drifted away, but simply disappeared. One moment present, the next gone, with the surrounding stars unchanged, as if nothing had happened. A strange sense of disconnection washed over me. It was like walking into a room and forgetting why, or suddenly noticing silence after a noise stops. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled. I decided to take a break and sat on a nearby boulder. Pulling out my water bottle, I checked my phone. No signal, which was expected. The time read 3:19 a.m. I only noted this because when I looked again later, only 2 minutes had passed, though it felt much longer. The desert plays tricks on your perception of time. I was certain I'd only been sitting there for a minute or two, but something felt off. When I stood up and looked back at the sky, the spot where the light had been was gone. I knew it was in the summer triangle, but the stars seemed different, like one was missing or had shifted. I half-heartedly took a few more pictures, but my enthusiasm had vanished. The entire place felt unnaturally still. As I packed up my gear, something caught my eye. Far to the north, beyond the park boundary, a single light hovered low on the horizon. At first, I thought it was a plane, but it remained motionless. No red or green strobes, just a soft, steady white glow. For several minutes, I watched from beside my car. The light didn't move or change brightness. When I started driving back toward the main road, I kept checking the rearview mirror. It remained exactly where it had been, not following, not approaching, just present. Once I passed the bend near Ryan Mountain, it disappeared completely. Only trees, rocks, and darkness remained. I didn't share the experience for a couple of days, not out of fear of disbelief, but because I couldn't even articulate what I'd witnessed. Later that week, I showed a coworker the long exposure photos. They were unremarkable, clean star fields with nothing unusual. But I know what I saw. That star moved differently, slow, deliberate, as if guided by something beyond our understanding, something that didn't care about making sense to us. I haven't returned to that spot since. I was driving back to California after helping my sister move to Austin. Avoiding motel expenses, I was comfortable sleeping in my truck. Somewhere along Route 62, not far from 29 Palms, I'd been driving for Howe. My plan was to stop for the night after passing the last gas station in Parker. Close to 1:30 in the morning, I pulled onto a dirt shoulder. The Mojave night surrounded me. No lights, no other vehicles. Just vast openness, stars overhead, dry air, and the low hum of absolute silence. I cracked the driver's window and shut off the engine. I woke up in the dark, that early morning time when the sky hints at dawn, but the sun hasn't yet appeared. Something felt off, but not because of any sound or movement. It was more like surfacing from a dream I couldn't recall, with a sense that something wasn't right. The cab was completely silent. No phone buzzing, no passing cars, no headlights. When I sat up and looked around, I noticed something strange. Every single window was fogged over. Not just a little condensation, but thick and smeared, as if someone had wiped them down with a wet rag from the outside. This made no sense. The air had been bone dry when I parked, with no humidity or dew. I wiped a spot on the inside of the windshield with my sleeve. It was clear. The fog was entirely on the outside of the windows. A weird feeling settled in my stomach. I hesitated to turn on the dome light, sensing something was wrong about illuminating the space around me. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine. Complete silence surrounded me. Cautiously, I cracked the door open. The air hit me, cold and dry, definitely not damp enough to explain the window condensation. Stepping out, I closed the door gently. The ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel, without a trace of moisture. I walked a slow circle around the truck, examining the windows. The fogging was even, with long swipes and wide arcs. Some spots had finger-like streaks, as if someone had been trying to clean the windows from the outside. I crouched down and looked underneath the truck. Nothing. No footprints, no marks in the dirt. The silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. Something was definitely not right, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Climbing back in, I locked the door. The truck started up fine, headlights cutting through dirt and low shrubs as I pulled back onto the road. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. The radio display had completely reset. Time presets, everything, as if the battery had been disconnected. I hadn't touched anything. My phone's clock read 5:42 a.m., but the sky didn't match. It was still deep, pre-dawn dark. I'd only meant to nap for a couple of hours, parking around 1:30 and last checking my phone at 1:47 a.m. If it really was 5:42, nearly 4 hours had passed. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like I just blinked. The smell inside the truck was different. Not bad, just strange, like old copper or ozone. Faint, but definitely there. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see movement, but the road remained empty. I reached 29 Palms just after 6, with the sun finally rising. At the gas station, I grabbed coffee and used the bathroom. While washing my hands, I noticed a thin red mark across my neck, higher near my jaw. It looked like a pressure line, but I hadn't been wearing anything tight, just a hoodie. That's when everything started to unsettle me. The fogged windows, wiped glass, unusual smell, time inconsistencies, nothing added up. I tried finding rational explanations. Maybe someone messed with the truck while I slept. Maybe I'd just miscalculated my rest time. Maybe the battery glitched. But I'd slept in that truck countless times in different places. Never had I seen windows fogged like this, especially not in the desert with no humidity, no breath inside, and no signs of disturbance. I drove straight home that day, stopping only for gas. Back in my driveway, I checked every inch of the truck. No damage, no missing items. Yet that faint metallic smell lingered, inging to the fabric even with windows rolled down most of the way. Carl and I were out night fishing at Goose Hollow Lake in northeastern Pennsylvania, a quiet spot with hardly anyone around. It was late September, and we'd taken his small aluminum boat with an electric trolling motor to a shallow cove on the lake's north end. Good bass fishing spot, full of lily pads and deadfall. The evening was unusually warm, still in the low 70s after sunset. The sun had gone down around 7:15, and by 8 o'clock it was completely dark. The lake was absolutely still, glassy water, clear sky, stars everywhere. What struck us was the total silence. No bugs, no frogs, no fish jumping. Normally, you'd be swatting mosquitoes non-stop near the water, but not this night. Carl was the first to point out how weird the silence was. "You hear that?" he asked. When I looked over, he just gestured around. Nothing. Our voices seemed too loud in the absolute quiet. The water lapped gently against the boat's side, but otherwise, complete stillness surrounded us. We sat listening for maybe 5 or 10 minutes when a light appeared through the trees on the lake's east side. It wasn't bright, more a dull amber color, like a street lamp. But it was moving, gliding smoothly left to right above the tree line. No blinking, no strobing, just a steady, silent path. I initially thought it might be a drone, but it moved differently. One smooth trajectory, as if on invisible tracks. Carl stood up slowly, hand on my shoulder, squinting toward the light. "You seeing that?" he asked. I nodded. We watched it drift across the treetops for about 15 or 20 seconds before it dipped behind the trees and vanished. That night haunted me. The next evening, I dreamed about a bright white light. Not a shape, not a ship, just a close, soundless brightness hanging above me. I'm still not sure if it was a dream or a memory, but one thing's certain, I haven't slept in the truck since. The amber light glided silently across the lake, first on one side, then instantly on the other. It was impossible. No way something could cross a mile of dense forest and water that quickly. Carl sat down slowly, just staring. We watched it move, first quickly, then slower, almost like it was scanning something. Then it stopped completely, totally still above the trees, not swaying, not drifting, just frozen in place. Then it vanished, not fading, not flying away. 1 second there, next second gone. No trail, no noise. We sat in silence for a long time after that. Carl finally reeled in his line and suggested we head back. I agreed. The strange part came when we checked our watches. Mine said 9:22. Carl's showed 10:03. My phone read 10:39. We'd only brought 3 beers, weren't drunk, and the trolling motor ran fine. But somehow 2 hours had passed without either of us noticing. On the way back, I kept looking behind us, half expecting to see the light again. The lake remained dark. No bugs. No sound. Everything looked normal when we reached shore. Truck in place, gear dry, keys in my pocket. Even the truck's clock was off, showing 12:12 with no explanation. We didn't talk much driving home. Carl looked pale. We tried convincing ourselves it was nothing, maybe a drone, something ordinary. But the dead silence before the light appeared and the unexplained time loss stayed with us. Days later, Carl told me he tried returning to find the cove. His GPS kept jumping, compass spinning in slow circles no matter how he pointed it. I haven't been back to that lake since. The Blue Ridge Mountains in early October offered a peaceful escape from my usual routine. I'd taken a week off work, seeking solitude and a chance to clear my head. The day was cool but sunny, with temperatures hovering around the mid-60s. I was hiking a lesser-used trail near Dotton Park, about 6 miles from the trailhead, the kind of path where you might go hours without seeing another person. At midday, I stopped at an overlook with a clear view of the next ridge, roughly a mile away. While sitting on a flat rock and enjoying a moment of quiet, something caught my eye. A shiny object hovered just above the tree line, like a piece of chrome suspended in midair. It wasn't moving, not even a slight wobble. Initially, I thought it might be a drone, but it seemed too large and too silent. The object was a small silver dot, reflecting sunlight like a mirror held at an angle. I studied it intently, though I couldn't say exactly how long. When I looked down to grab a protein bar from my pack, it was just a quick glance. But when I looked up again, the object had vanished completely. No trace remained where it had been moments before. Something felt distinctly strange. The forest, which moments earlier had been alive with sound, chickadees and distant woodpeckers, was now utterly silent. It wasn't that the animals had fled or been scared away. Instead, it felt like someone had pressed mute on the entire woodland ecosystem. I stood up and slowly turned, straining to hear anything. No rustling, no insect sounds, not even a breeze through the leaves. I could hear my own blood pumping. This unnatural silence made me uneasy. Despite not being easily frightened, the woods seemed to be holding their breath, waiting. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or the birds were simply taking a break. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally off. After a few more minutes, I packed up and continued my hike, but the experience lingered in my mind. I cut across a connector trail heading back toward the trailhead, knowing I'd still get a solid hike in, just not as far out as originally planned. About an hour later, I stopped at a narrow switchback section with a good view back toward the ridge where I'd seen that strange thing earlier. I wasn't searching for anything, just pausing to catch my breath. But then this faint hum emerged, like distant power lines. Except there weren't any power lines, no buildings, no roads, just woods. The sound wasn't loud or constant, more like a pressure behind my ears that pulsed every few seconds, deeper than tinnitus. I held my breath to check if it was coming from me, but the sound remained unchanged, low, barely perceptible. I stood still and scanned the sky. Nothing. No planes, no contrails, no birds. It struck me then that I hadn't seen a single bird since that earlier overlook, not even the ubiquitous crows. My pace quickened. The trail grew narrow and overgrown. I almost missed a turnoff where the sign had fallen down. Doubling back cost me about 15 minutes. The hum continued, steady now, following me like a persistent headache just behind my skull. Approaching the parking lot, I passed a couple hiking in the opposite direction. Serious hikers with full gear. We exchanged brief hellos. I considered asking if they'd noticed anything unusual, but decided against it. I just wanted to get back. As I neared the trailhead, the hum vanished. No dramatic ending, just gone. Suddenly, the woods seemed to come alive again. A cardinal called from the left, and a squirrel darted across my path. The parking lot held only 2 vehicles, my car and an old Subaru, likely belonging to the hiking couple. I stood beside my car, letting my heart rate settle. Though I hadn't run, I felt inexplicably wired. My shirt was damp with sweat, despite the cool air. During the drive back to my rented cabin, my mind kept returning to that thing I'd seen. Not metallic like a plane, not dull like a balloon, more like polished glass or chrome, something that simply didn't belong. I kept the experience to myself for a while, not wanting to make a big deal. Maybe it was just a drone. Maybe the silence was coincidence. Maybe I'd imagined the entire hum. We were driving west on Route 36, somewhere outside Dakar, Illinois, late at night. The clock read around 10:30. maybe closer to 11. Natalie, my girlfriend, was dozing off in the passenger seat after we'd left her sister's place in Champaign following dinner. The October night was warm, with sticky air seeping through the cracked windows. We were traveling through a desolate stretch of road, 2 lanes cutting across flat, open farmland. Everything looked the same: soybean fields, grain silos, scattered barns, with only occasional farmhouse lights and our high beams breaking the darkness. As I zoned out, watching the road lines, something in the field caught my eye. At first I thought it might be a combine light or tower, but it was different: low, tree height, and moving. A pale yellowish-white glow, steady as a beach ball, gliding parallel to us about 50 or 60 yards off the road. No strobes, no blinking, no sound. This wasn't some bouncing drone light. It was floating, matching our car's speed precisely. I nudged Natalie. "What?" she mumbled. "There's something out there," I said. She sat up, looked, and leaned toward my window. "Is that a light?" she asked. We slowed down slightly. The light continued gliding, perfectly synchronized with our speed. "Should I pull over?" I asked. She nodded silently. I eased onto the gravel shoulder and stopped, turning on the hazards. The moment we halted, the light began to dim, not sharply, but gradually, like a flashlight losing battery power. Natalie grabbed her phone, rolled down the window, and tried to record. But by the time she hit record, nothing remained, just the dark field outline. But I've hiked that route 5, maybe 6 times since, and I've never encountered that kind of profound silence again. Not once. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of cornstalks and distant cricket sounds. A sudden dog bark shattered the quiet, echoing from a nearby farm before fading away. We sat motionless, the car's cooling hood ticking softly. "I saw it, right?" she asked, checking her phone. Nothing showed in the video. Almost involuntarily, I opened the door and stepped out. Something compelled me to verify what might be lurking in the darkness. The moment I left the car, the atmosphere changed. The air felt unnaturally dense, reminiscent of the charged stillness before a thunderstorm. Walking to the shoulder's edge, I scanned the field. Darkness stretched endlessly, dry corn stalks whispering in a barely perceptible breeze. Something felt fundamentally wrong, an inexplicable sense of unease that made the landscape feel too perfectly still. "Get back in the car," Natalie said, her voice tight. When I turned, she was looking past me, her gaze fixed beyond my shoulder. Spinning around, I caught a fleeting glimpse of that strange glow, hovering low, maybe 5 or 6 feet above the ground, about 100 yards out. It was faint, almost foggy, then vanished instantly, like a dimmer switch suddenly extinguished. We sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure how to process what we'd witnessed. The encounter wasn't overtly threatening, but it felt watchful, expectant. Eventually, I started driving. Natalie kept glancing back at the fields. Minutes later, approaching a county road intersection, movement caught my eye. Something tall shifted at the tree line's edge, deer perhaps, or shadows. Neither of us spoke. In Riverton, we stopped for gas. While Natalie used the bathroom, I stretched my legs beneath a sky blazing with stars, the strange encounter still hanging unspoken between us. Near Hinton, Oklahoma, I was out tracking a late spring storm forming just west of the Canadian River. Nothing major, just a cluster of isolated cells that would light up the plains without becoming a full supercell system. I'm not a professional storm chaser, just a guy with a decent camera setup and a habit of spending too much time in his truck. It was early June, around 6:30 in the evening. The sky was bruising over to the southwest, all purples and pale green edges. I parked on a dirt road alongside a cattle fence, maybe 10 miles from town. An open field stretched to the east, wheat or wild grass, totally flat, with no trees or power lines. Perfect. I set up my tripod facing the storm line and started rolling. Standing off to the side with a remote, I took stills when I saw a strike. The storm moved slowly, with distant thunder low and drawn out, the kind that rolls through your chest. The air smelled sharp, ozone, dust, damp heat. Every few minutes, a bolt would reach down and touch somewhere far off, but nothing really close. About 40 minutes in, it happened. One strike hit the field straight ahead, maybe a couple 100 yards out. It wasn't the brightest bolt I'd ever seen, but close enough that the sound hit barely a second after the flash. A big crack, like a board snapping, followed by a growl that seemed to come from under the ground. It startled me, but I kept the camera rolling. I even said something dumb out loud, like, "That was a good one." We made it to Springfield just after midnight, checking into a cheap motel near the highway. Neither of us slept well. I kept waking up every hour, checking the window like I thought it might be there, hovering outside the parking lot. In the morning, we didn't talk about it much. I think both of us were trying to downplay it, like maybe it was just some weird farm equipment or a trick of the light. But we both saw it. We both know it wasn't normal. We haven't driven that route again since. No planes, no blinking red lights. I kept scanning the horizon, half expecting that glow to show up again. It didn't. The lightning strike was a typical scene at first. A white flare, a boom, then nothing. No fires, no smoke, no unusual odors. Around 8 p.m., as the storm dissipated and light faded, I packed up and drove back to my rental house in El Reno. After dinner, I transferred the footage to my laptop, quickly scrubbing through to grab a few clips before calling it a night. A proper edit could wait until morning. When I opened the file the next day, I started examining the best strike frame by frame. The lightning itself was brief, spanning only 5 or 6 frames, but something caught my eye in the frame just before the flash. Initially, I suspected a camera artifact or shutter glitch. My equipment isn't top tier, but it's usually reliable. Zooming in revealed a distinct shape, not a light or a smudge, but a dark object. Disc-shaped and horizontal, slightly tilted, it hovered about 20 feet above the grass, perfectly centered in the frame. I stared for a full minute, then re-watched the section carefully. The shape appeared suddenly, one moment just grass and a dim sky, then this unexplained form, followed immediately by lightning. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe a bird mid-flight, a drone, something on the lens, but nothing matched. No wings, no blur, no rotor blades, just a flat, dark gray oval with soft edges, almost as if it were absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Checking time codes and slowing the footage revealed no other anomalies or sensor errors. Attempts to recreate the shape using other video stills failed. Adjusting contrast, shadows, and saturation produced nothing similar. Whatever was in that scene was real, not a lens flare or compression glitch. Sleepless that night, I returned to the location the next morning. Same road, same field, now under clear skies. Walking to the strike point, I found no dramatic burn marks, just a small patch of grass that looked flattened, as if something heavy had hovered close enough to compress it. I was home alone one night in late October about 2 years ago, living in a small suburban Cleveland neighborhood. The kind of place where everyone knows each other, but not really. Quiet streets lined with older houses, mostly filled with families and retired folks. Nothing exciting ever happens there. At least that's what I thought. Close to midnight, I first noticed the humming, low and barely perceptible, like the distant buzz of a transformer or a generator somewhere nearby. I was sitting on the couch, watching a late-night show, when the sound caught my attention. It wasn't steady, more of a slow, pulsing vibration. I paused the show and listened carefully, wondering if it was just my imagination or something typical like the heating system. 2 months ago, I went storm chasing and captured something strange. Out in the field, I discovered a wide circular depression, maybe 8 or 10 feet across. The edges weren't sharp, but definitely noticeable. No scorch marks, no unusual smell, just an odd, shallow indentation. I spent an hour walking the field, searching for anything unusual, metal, wires, something that might explain the shape. Nothing turned up. No footprints except mine, no tire tracks, no signs of equipment. On my way back to the truck, I felt a peculiar sensation. Not exactly like being watched, but more like I'd forgotten something important. That nagging, nervous feeling you get when you leave home wondering if you've left the stove on. I sat in the truck's cab for a while, staring out at the field. When I got home, I showed the frame to my brother, who knows a lot about camera technology. I didn't reveal what I thought it looked like, just asked if he could explain it. He studied it carefully and said it didn't resemble any digital artifact he recognized. Instead, he described it as looking inserted, not through editing, but as if something was actually present in the scene that the camera briefly captured. I asked if a lightning flash could create a visual echo or reflection, but he shook his head. Not without light, he said. This is a dark shape. The footage remains untouched. I haven't deleted it, but I haven't watched it again either. It's just sitting in a desktop folder labeled Hinton Field. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, I think about how that thing only appeared in one frame, like it was waiting, and the lightning momentarily revealed its presence before vanishing in 1/100th of a second. The streetlights caught my attention first. It was well past midnight, and something felt off. They weren't just flickering randomly, there was a deliberate pattern. The nearest light would blink twice, then the next one 3 times, followed by another blinking once. This wasn't a typical electrical glitch where an entire block goes dark. It looked like a coded signal. I called out to my neighbors, shouting down the street. Nothing. No response, no movement, no lights on in any houses. Just those strange rhythmic streetlights and a deep, mechanical hum vibrating through the cold October air. I wasn't about to step outside at this hour, so I stayed by the window, watching. Curiosity got the better of me. I checked the breaker box near the sidewalk, thinking someone might be tampering with the power. Everything looked normal. No damage, no obvious issues, except that persistent hum, low and steady. I tried calling the utility company, but the phone just rang endlessly. No automated system, no recording, which struck me as weird. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a strange coincidence, but something didn't feel right. The next morning, I asked my neighbor Karen if she'd noticed anything unusual the night before. She stared at me like I was crazy. Everything was fine, she said. The other neighbors echoed her sentiment over the next few days. Was I imagining it? Maybe I'd been half asleep, but each night I kept checking. The humming returned, sometimes soft, sometimes loud. The street lights continued their cryptic dance, never repeating the same pattern twice, always shifting, always silent, always just beyond understanding. The humming had become a familiar presence, almost like an unwelcome guest. I'd track its appearances meticulously, noting how long each episode lasted, sometimes just 5 minutes, other times stretching close to an hour. There seemed to be no rhyme or reason to its occurrence, no connection to weather or any discernible trigger. That night changed everything. About a month into these strange experiences, I was in bed when the humming intensified, more powerful than ever before. Drawn to the window, I watched as streetlights began flickering in an eerie, synchronized rhythm, pulsing like a mechanical heartbeat. Then, one by one, they went dark, leaving only empty, shadowy poles. Suddenly, everything stopped. The hum cut out completely, as if someone had flipped a switch. I reached for my phone to call the power company, but found myself isolated. No signal, no Wi-Fi. The entire block seemed cut off from the world. My car radio produced nothing but static. The neighborhood had fallen into an unnatural silence, houses dark and still. I felt trapped, suspended in a moment where time itself seemed to have paused. My phone showed a full battery, but remained dead. Clocks stood frozen. Minutes crawled by, maybe 10, maybe 15, before the streetlights gradually flickered back to life, slowly illuminating the block. The hum returned, but weaker this time. Signals restored, clocks resumed ticking. When I called the utility company, a recorded message insisted there had been no reported outages. Sleep eluded me that night. Something felt off, like I was being observed, tested, though I had no concrete evidence. After that, I stopped sharing my experiences. People dismissed my stories, changing the subject or looking at me like I was losing my mind. The flickering and humming continued over the next 6 months, appearing unpredictably, sometimes frequent, sometimes absent for weeks. I remained the only witness on the street. I even approached local police about strange lights and sounds, but they treated my concerns as a waste of time. Now, driving home at night, I occasionally glimpse similar flickering streetlights on distant blocks, always just out of reach, always vanishing when I try to get closer. We were 2 hours into our hike when we reached our campsite, a small flat ledge halfway up the canyon wall, overlooking a dry wash. Late June meant hot days, but cool nights, perfect for sleeping without sweating through our bags. Mark and I needed this break from city life, with no cell service and nothing but wind in the scrub and occasional bird calls. Our plan was straightforward. Hike in Friday morning, camp Friday night, return Saturday afternoon. We carried our standard gear, tents, food, water, and some firewood scavenged on the way up. The trail started smoothly, dusty and narrow but not too steep. Mark's jokes kept our spirits high, and I tried to forget about pending work emails. By mid-afternoon, we claimed our ledge and set up camp. We started a fire and watched the canyon walls shift colors as the sun moved west. The silence felt alive, like the land was breathing. Around 9 p.m., our fire burned low, and we lay on our sleeping pads, gazing at the Milky Way, a bright smear impossible to see in the city. Just as I was about to grab my water bottle, I heard something strange. Faint, muffled voices, like a group talking softly. I thought it was Mark. "Hey, you talking?" I asked. He shook his head, confused. I sat up and listened intently. The sound was definitely there, quiet, as if underwater or behind a thick wall. It wasn't coming from the canyon floor or our ledge, but seemed to be directly above us. I looked up, expecting to see campers on the ridge, but saw only sky and stars. The sound wasn't wind or animal noises, and it didn't match any echo from below. It was right above our heads. The rest of the neighborhood, or in this case the canyon, looked normal, and no one else seemed to care. I still don't know what I heard or saw, but it was real enough to make me question everything about that quiet, seemingly peaceful place. We were out in the canyon, the fire dying down, when things started getting strange. The silence grew thick around us, broken only by muffled syllables, like a dozen voices talking at once, but distant and indistinct. It lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds before vanishing completely. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Mark nodded, his face pale. I tried to lighten the mood with a joke about aliens, and he laughed nervously, but I could tell he was unsettled. After that, we didn't say much. We sat in the darkness, the fire nearly extinguished, the quiet stretching longer than usual. I kept looking up, half expecting to see something unusual. Later, as I was preparing to sleep, I discovered my handheld NOAA weather radio wasn't working. I tried switching it on and off, but the screen remained black. Mark's phone had no signal, which wasn't uncommon, but the radio typically picked up something out here. Something felt off. The next morning seemed completely normal. Sunlight filled the canyon, birds began their morning calls, and everything felt warm and dry. We packed up and started hiking out, but Mark kept glancing behind us, as if convinced something was watching us. The return trip was unusually quiet compared to our earlier trek. I tried rationalizing it, maybe fatigue or the canyon's strange acoustics were playing tricks on us. But those voices from the night still felt distinctly out of place. To this day, I'm uncertain what we experienced. Was it an unusual atmospheric phenomenon, wildlife, unseen people, or something else entirely? I've never heard anything like it before or since. This wasn't the first time I'd encountered something inexplicable. Months earlier, I was working a late-night pizza delivery shift just outside Portland. It was early October, with that damp chill that seems to penetrate your very bones. The streetlights looked weary, the suburban neighborhood silent, except for the occasional leaf crackling under my tires. I was driving my usual late-night delivery route when something caught my eye about halfway down the block. A dark, basketball-sized shape hung motionless near the road's edge, maybe 6 or 7 feet above the ground. At first, I thought it was a drone, maybe some kid playing around after dark. I slowed the car and studied it closely. This wasn't like any drone I'd seen before. No blinking lights, no movement. I rolled down the window and cut the radio, wanting to hear if it made any sound. Complete silence. Not a hint of motor noise or vibration. For about 20 seconds, it just hung there. Then it started rotating. The movement was smooth and precise, not like a typical drone bobbing in the wind, but something deliberate, like it was scanning or examining something. I was starting to feel uneasy, but still convinced it was some new drone model I didn't recognize. Without warning, it shot straight up. The ascent was incredible, vertical and lightning fast, like someone had hit an invisible rocket booster. No sound, no buzz, just a clean, silent climb that defied everything I knew about flying objects. In an instant, it vanished into a thin layer of wispy clouds. I sat there, heart racing, staring at the gray sky. The clouds were too thin to swallow something whole. None of it made sense. I kept driving, but something felt off. Throughout my remaining deliveries, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Later that night, I told my roommate Dan about the incident. He just laughed it off, saying I was probably tired or imagining things. But strange things started happening. faint humming sounds through the apartment walls. Checking each time revealed nothing. Kitchen drawers slightly open when I was certain I'd closed them. Books mysteriously moved on shelves. Nothing screamed break-in, but something was definitely not right. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often, unable to explain these small, unsettling disruptions. I was flying a small single-engine Cessna late one night in July, cruising westbound over Oregon's outskirts at about 5,500 feet. The sky was clear, the air smooth, and the day's heat still lingered in the cabin. Just another routine night cross-country flight to keep my license current. Around 11:15 p.m., something caught my eye out the left window. At first, I thought it was another plane, maybe a twin engine, but something wasn't right. The shape was dark, almost completely black against the night sky. No navigation lights, no strobes, no sound. It was the kind of silence that stands out when everything else sounds normal. I shifted my gaze to get a better look. The object was about 300 yards away, flying alongside me and matching my speed perfectly. What struck me was how it moved. It wasn't flying like a normal aircraft. Instead, it tilted sharply, banking into turns no regular plane could manage. Its movement was smooth and steady, almost like it was slipping through the air on its own terms. I glanced down at my instruments, triple-checking everything. Airspeed, altitude, all normal. No erratic readings, no turbulence. When I looked back, the shape was still there, still moving with me. I tried to radio it in. Cessna N8453P to unknown traffic. Identify yourself. I hit the transmit button 3 times, but got nothing. No call sign, no response, not even static. Then, in that moment of expectation, it disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. Not fading, not flying off into the distance, just vanished, like it never existed. The cockpit suddenly felt different. The quiet seemed heavier, the air thicker. I double-checked everything, windows, instruments, fuel gauge, all normal. My heart was racing, but I stayed calm. I radioed Portland Approach to report the sighting. They confirmed no other traffic on radar, no unidentified objects. When I gave them my position again and asked about unusual scopes, they maintained there was nothing. Whatever that thing was that night, it definitely wasn't a drone, and it wasn't here for fun. I was reviewing drone footage from a field survey in the Mojave when something caught my eye. We'd spent a week out there cataloging desert tortoise habitats around the Amboy Crater area, way off the highway. Heat, dust, and not much else. Back home in Riverside, I started sorting through the drone files. Just boring flyover stuff mostly. But one clip made me stop. Everything was unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, not even a rabbit crossing the rocks. It was recorded around 6:40 a.m., just as the sun was getting high enough to stretch shadows thin. I was skipping ahead in 5-second jumps when I saw it. A shadow glided across the rocks from left to right. Big, perfectly round, smooth as glass like a spotlight, except pitch black. It moved slow, maybe 10 feet every second, completely silent. There was nothing in the sky, nothing above it. I paused it, scrolled back, played it again. A perfect circle, maybe 20 feet wide, sliding across the landscape. It didn't match the sun's angle or shape. Not a drone. I know our shadows, and this wasn't one of them. I checked the GPS timestamp. It was recorded during a solo flight with no other team members nearby. I thought maybe it was a lens issue. I've seen weird flares, even rolling shutter glitches when the sun hits just right. But this wasn't a digital artifact. It was real. Like many pilots, I've had my share of unexplained encounters. During one flight, I saw something off radar. I tried explaining the weird angles in silence, but colleagues just told me to stay safe. The rest of the flight was quiet, though I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. After landing, I filed an incident report with the FAA. They weren't interested, offering the usual explanations about optical illusions or atmospheric conditions. At the local flying club, other pilots shared similar experiences. One mentioned seeing a dark shape moving strangely during a night flight. Another heard strange radio static but never saw anything. I never saw that thing again. But sometimes, when flying solo at night, I catch a glimpse out of the corner of my eye. Something moving at impossible angles, always silent, just at the edge of the lights. And I can't help but wonder if it's still out there watching. The drone footage was strange from the start. A shadow passed behind a boulder, disappearing and reappearing on the other side. It seemed to interact with the terrain, showing depth. I pulled the drone from its case in the garage, checking for any potential issues. No scratches, no lens bugs, nothing that might explain what I'd seen. I ran the footage through another program. Still there. No errors. The next day, I called Heather about the flight logs. I didn't mention the shadow, just asked if she remembered anyone flying over us that morning. She hadn't. The airspace was clear. No scheduled passes, no random traffic. Just us, some tortoises, and endless sand. That night, rewatching the clip, something else caught my attention. Right before the shadow entered the frame, a faint crackling noise, like distant radio static, flickered through the audio. Our drone mic usually only picked up wind and motor sounds, but this was different. It lasted just a second or two, cutting out as the shadow vanished. 2 days later, I drove back alone. Maybe it was stupid, but I needed to see for myself. The GPS tagged the location over a dry wash about 3 miles east of the crater. By mid-morning, I'd parked and hiked out. No clouds, no sound, just heat shimmering above the rocks. I found the exact spot from the footage. Same boulder, same wash. Everything looked normal. Walking where the shadow had moved, I found nothing unusual. No burn marks, no impressions, no tracks. But the silence felt different. The desert's never loud, but this was beyond quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even distant plane hums. It was like someone had muted the world. After an hour of pacing and searching, hoping it was just a glitch, I heard it. A brief crackle to the south, like a walkie-talkie switching on for half a second, then silence again. I called out. Nothing, waited, still nothing. Walking south, about 50 yards in, a strange pressure built in my chest. Not pain, just wrong. The air felt heavier. I turned back to the truck, leaving whatever it was behind. I'd been tracking something strange in my drone footage for months, but I kept it to myself. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I replayed the initial clip countless times, even showing it to my brother who used to work with survey drones up north. His reaction was telling. He squinted, scratched his chin, and simply said, "That's not from your drone," before handing it back without further comment. A month later, while organizing clips from a different Barstow trip, I noticed something unsettling. During an early morning flight, the drone camera suddenly stuttered. Not a technical glitch, but a brief, sharp dip. A round shadow swept in from the top left, just a corner visible, maybe 5T across. It vanished before the drone completed its pass. I checked the logs, no scheduled air traffic, no other drones. This flight was over 60 members from the first, with a different day, am and week. Curiosity piqued. I started combing through older footage from months prior. Focusing on early morning light, I discovered 2 more clips, one from Arizona, another near Ridge Rest, with strange audio static and subtle camera drops. No visible shadows this time, but the pattern was eerily consistent. Silent mornings, brief crackles, tiny gimbal dips. I never reported these observations. In my line of work, chasing weird desert shadows wouldn't be taken seriously. This is how I pay rent, and credibility matters. Then last week, everything changed. We were testing a thermal rig near Goffs in late afternoon heat. With 2 grad students on site, I launched the drone for a final overhead shot before the light shifted. Everything seemed normal until 3 minutes in. The video feed cut to black for 2 seconds before returning. The drone appeared fine, with no recorded errors. But when I reviewed the footage that night, the black frame wasn't blank. Instead, a dome of darkness filled almost the entire frame. Faint terrain edges were barely visible, suggesting the drone had passed under something. Impossible, given the flight path showed open sky. That familiar, faint static lingered. We were out on the lake late that night, me and Jake, doing what we always did on weekends when we wanted to escape everything. The water was like glass, stars so bright they seemed almost touchable. Our little motorboat was anchored far from shore, fishing lines waiting for a bite. Nothing special planned, just fishing, talking, maybe catching some bass or catfish. The night was cold, but not freezing. We both wore jackets, sitting on the back bench with our rods. Silence surrounded us, broken only by occasional bobber plops or gentle fish nibbles. The boat creaked softly, its ripples spreading out across the glassy surface. Jake went quiet, staring behind the boat. I followed his gaze, thinking he might have spotted a bird or jumping fish. Then we heard it, a sudden, heavy splash right behind us. But something was wrong. No ripples spread. No movement disturbed the water's perfect smoothness. The sound seemed to come from the water itself, without actually moving anything. I scanned the dark water, feeling uneasy. Jake asked, "Did you hear that?" I nodded. We waited, expecting something to break the surface. Instead, a low droning sound emerged from beneath the boat. This wasn't like any engine noise or natural sound. Deep and steady, it vibrated through our bones, a constant, unnerving buzz. We didn't talk much after that, just listened. The droning continued for several minutes, completely still, completely silent, except for that sound. I haven't flown since that night. I told the team it was an equipment malfunction, something we needed to recalibrate. But I still don't know what I saw, just shadows. Shadows that move without light. Shadows that appear where nothing exists. And they're showing up more frequently. Always in the middle of nowhere. Always when it's quiet. Always watching from above. It buzzed for exactly 1.8 seconds, then vanished. The lake was pitch black, with the moon hidden behind clouds. Jake and I were out on the water, surrounded by darkness. A low, constant droning sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Just beneath our boat, I swept the small flashlight across the water, searching for any sign of movement, but saw nothing. After about 5 minutes, the sound stopped abruptly. No gradual fade, just a sudden silence that felt heavier than the noise itself. We both knew something was off. Without discussing it, I told Jake we needed to head back to shore. As he started the motor, something felt wrong. The water was unnaturally still. No splashes, no wakes, nothing. Normally, even the smallest boat movement would disturb the surface, but this lake seemed frozen, like it was holding its breath. Jake broke the silence, asking if I felt anything strange. I struggled to explain. "It's not exactly fear," I told him. "More like something is in the water, just below the surface. Something that doesn't want to be noticed, but also doesn't want to be ignored." Halfway back, the boat's GPS screen flickered and went blank for a few seconds. That's when the unease really set in. The screen came back to life, but the glitch added another layer of weirdness to our already unsettling experience. When we finally reached the dock, the familiar creaking of wooden planks felt like a relief. The night air seemed lighter, and the lake looked normal again. Moonlight and stars reflecting on its surface, as if nothing had happened. We packed up silently, avoiding any discussion of what we'd experienced. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. Nothing was there. That night, sleep was impossible. The low drone and mysterious splash kept echoing in my mind, like they were still waiting. I haven't been back to that part of the lake since, and I'm not sure I want to. October was winding down when I drove back from Flagstaff to Kingman. The night was late, just past 11, after helping clean up my cousin's kid's birthday party and chatting with my uncle. The drive through the desert along I-40 is familiar. I've made this trip countless times. My truck's dash cam, a Viofo model I installed a few months back after a traffic incident, was running as always. The night was calm, dry, cool, with a moon hanging overhead. The road was empty except for 2 semi-trucks I passed between Seligman and Ashfork. An old Raymond Chandler audiobook played, and a Gatorade sat in the cup holder. Everything seemed normal until I got home. Parking in the driveway, I killed the engine and gathered my things. As usual, I glanced at the dash cam, but something was off. The screen was frozen on a single frame. Black road, starry sky with a timestamp reading 12381, while my truck's clock showed 1240. This didn't make sense. The camera syncs with GPS, so the time should match. I tapped the screen, unplugged and replugged it. The cam rebooted normally, started recording again. No visible damage. Inside, I transferred the SD card to my laptop. The files save in 3-minute chunks. The last full clip ended at 12:38, followed by a strange 2-second partial file. I opened it. Initially, it showed a typical nighttime highway scene. Center lines, desert brush, stars overhead. But the final frame was bizarre. Suddenly, everything went black. Not just the road or camera feed, but the sky itself. The stars simply blinked out. I double-checked using video editing software, frame by frame, to confirm what I'd seen. The drive was routine until I noticed something strange in the footage. The sky, once filled with dozens of clear stars, suddenly went black in the last frame. Everything else remained the same: the desert landscape, the road, the truck's interior, but now empty of celestial light. The next video file picked up at 12:41, as if 2 minutes had vanished without a trace. According to the GPS log, I'd traveled an incredibly short distance, just 0.1 miles, about 500 feet. Oddly, the speed was recorded as 0, suggesting the GPS lost signal and then reconnected slightly ahead with no record of movement. Looking back, the rest of the drive appeared completely normal. No missing footage, no glitches. I rewatched everything carefully, searching for anything unusual. That's when I noticed something peculiar. In the clips before the gap, around 12:35, a strange shimmer appeared in the upper right corner of the front camera. It wasn't on the road or hood, but high in the sky. Small, about the size of my thumb on the screen, it moved like a bug crawling across a dirty windshield. Only it was suspect, nindead in the air. The shimmer drifted slightly left over a few minutes. When it passed over the stars, they blurred as if something semi-transparent had moved between the camera and the night sky. By 12:38, a blackout occurred. The rear camera revealed another oddity. In a single frame, a faint, wide arc of light appeared at the top center. It wasn't from tail lights or headlights, more like a soft, barely visible smudge. Then it vanished. I hesitated to tell anyone for days, unsure how to explain what I'd seen. Eventually, I showed my neighbor Danny, who used to work for... well, that's another part of the story. We'd started the hike around 10 in the morning, just a day trip with Jason, Liz, Mark, and me. The plan was simple: park off a dirt road near Newberry Springs and follow a trail Jason had explored before. It wasn't an official path, just old BLM land winding through low hills, classic Mojave terrain. Sun-baked rocks stretched everywhere, no shade in sight. We packed light, water, jerky, a few Cliff Bars each. Mark carried a beat-up Nikon, and Liz brought her small drone. I was just glad to escape the city for a day. By noon, the heat was brutal. No wind, just the sound of our boots crunching and occasional fly buzzing. A rusted truck shell from the 60s sat half buried in the sand, and Liz snapped some pictures. Jason joked it looked like it had been dropped from the sky. As we reached the ridge around 5 or 5:30, the sun was dropping low. We shared our remaining food and watched the hills darken. I checked my phone around 6, no service, but the GPS still worked. I'd marked our truck's location. Later, I showed the dash cam footage to my friend at ADOT. He watches a lot of weird sky videos, so I figured he might have insights. He watched it carefully and only asked, "Did you feel anything when it happened?" "No," I told him. Nothing seemed unusual during the drive. No sound, no lights, no static or radio dropouts. My audiobook played continuously. I didn't notice anything strange until I saw the dash cam clip. That's what really unsettled me. There was no specific moment that felt off. I've driven that road at night many times, seen dust storms and distant test range flashes. This was different. When I tried uploading the clip to a CarTech forum, the file wouldn't load properly. Compressing it turned the last frame into corrupted green static. A screen recording attempt produced a solid black frame, as if deliberately cut. The original still plays fine on my laptop. I've saved it on multiple drives and occasionally review it frame by frame. The result is always the same. Stars blink out, then return. And I was just driving. The ridge was quiet when we first spotted the light. A white orb hung motionless in the sky, maybe 100 feet up. No blinking, no sound, just this strange bright point hovering above the wash. We all stared, trying to make sense of something so out of place. Then it moved, smooth and slow, like it was gliding without effort. It drifted over the ridge and stopped again, completely silent. No drone hum, no chopper noise, just stillness. Liz tried to film it, but her phone was dead. My screen went black too, and Jason's and Mark's devices were equally unresponsive. We watched the light frozen in place. Suddenly it accelerated, moving faster and then simply vanished. Not behind anything, just gone. The next memory is walking downhill. Jason led, Liz and Mark followed. Something felt off. The darkness seemed deeper than it should have been, like we'd missed sunset entirely. When I checked my phone, it showed 8:12 p.m. with 47% battery. The GPS revealed we'd somehow wandered half a mile off our intended path. "Does anyone remember the last hour?" I asked. Nobody could agree. We argued about how long we'd been standing on the ridge, whether we'd packed up, or how the sun had disappeared. No, clear memories emerged. We decided to keep moving. The truck wasn't far, and none of us wanted to linger. We arrived just after 9. The air felt strange, heavy and charged like pre-thunderstorm electricity, though no clouds were visible. On the dashboard, the clock blinked erratically. Something had happened. We just couldn't remember what. We met up at a diner in Barstow 2 days after the hike, and something felt off. Not exactly sick, but tired and strange, like we hadn't truly rested since that day. Everyone had odd experiences. Jason mentioned hearing a high-pitched hum at night. Liz's smartwatch refused to sync with her phone. Mark started getting nosebleeds, which was unusual for him, and I kept waking up precisely at 2:17 a.m. every night for a week. The car's dome light still worked, though he swore it had been fine that morning. We jump-started it using Mark's jumper pack and left quickly. Later, I checked the GPS history on my phone. A strange gap existed between 6:08 and 7:55. The trail line simply stopped, then resumed further down the ridge, already heading back toward the road. Health data showed nothing. No steps, no elevation changes, no movement at all, no heart rate spikes. Liz claimed she'd filmed the light before her phone died, but no video existed, just a corrupted file labeled DCIM 1123 that wouldn't open. Mark's camera contained one photo, a white blur he didn't remember taking. Eventually, everything returned to normal. Phones worked, cameras worked. We stopped discussing it, not because we forgot, but because we had no explanation. None of us have been back to the Mojave since. I was driving west on Highway 95 about 30 miles south of Tonopah, just past midnight. I'd left Ely earlier that evening after a late dinner with my cousin, planning to stop in Beatty for the night. But I wasn't in a rush. The road was quiet, no other cars for miles. Only the dashboard lights and high beams stretched over the cracked blacktop. I knew this route well. Years of running deliveries meant I'd driven this stretch countless times, sometimes sleeping in the truck to avoid finding a room. The area near the test range always felt eerie, even on ordinary nights. You could drive for hours without seeing a gas station, and the desert's emptiness defied description. Sipping warm water and half listening to a fuzzy AM station, I noticed 3 lights in the sky, almost straight ahead, maybe 30 degrees up. They were small. The night was quiet, broken only by the sound of my truck's tires on the pavement. I was driving along a familiar stretch of road near some military installations when I noticed them. Bright white points in the sky, clearer than stars. At first, I thought they were aircraft flying in formation. They moved slowly, maintaining a perfect triangle with equal spacing between them. No blinking, no engine noise, just solid white lights. Curious, I turned off the radio and cracked the window, straining to hear something, anything. But there was nothing. What struck me was their unnatural steadiness. Unlike commercial planes that drift or wobble, these lights held their exact position for at least 5 minutes. They stayed roughly parallel to the road as I slowed down, trying to get a better look. Eventually, I pulled over to the shoulder and cut the engine. Total silence enveloped me. Stepping out of the truck, I saw the lights were maybe a little lower. Then, without warning, they split up. Each light darted off in a different direction. One left, one up, one straight back. So fast I could barely track their movement. No curves, just instant, precise displacement. They vanished. As I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, I wondered if they might be some kind of test aircraft or drones. But I'd never witnessed anything move like that, especially without a sound. When I turned back toward the truck, hey, we're back. Same 3 lights, same triangle formation, exactly where they'd been before. That return unnerved me more than their initial scatter. I hadn't seen them approach. They were simply there, as if they'd never left. I got in the truck and drove, not wanting to draw attention but eager to put distance between myself and whatever I'd just witnessed. I kept checking my mirrors and glancing up through the windshield. The lights remained stationary for a while, seeming to track me without getting closer or fading away. Then, just as suddenly as before, they blinked off. Not moving, just disappearing like someone flipped a switch. That was the last I saw of them. About 10 minutes later, my dash clock reset, flickering out and then returning with the wrong time, 4:11 a.m., which didn't match my watch or phone. The odometer had reset too, as if I'd just started my journey. I'm Aaron Klee, 62 years old now. Most of my life was spent near Anderson, Alaska, working radar maintenance for the Air Force at Clear Station. I was stationed there from 1995 to 2017, with my last 3 years as civilian support. I've rarely left this area. People always ask why I lock my truck everywhere, even in my own driveway, or why I don't go outside after dark unless absolutely necessary. It's not paranoia. I don't think something's going to leap out of the woods. I just don't feel right out there anymore. Not since that last week at Clear. In October 2017, I gave my notice. My wife had already retired, and we wanted to move closer to Fairbanks to spend more time with the grandkids. I had 2 weeks left, mostly doing equipment checks and closing service logs. The station sits in the middle of nowhere, just a massive radar dome, some support buildings, and endless tundra. That time of year, it gets cold fast. Long nights, short days. The sun wasn't rising until after 9, and darkness fell by 5. I worked swing shift from 2 to 10 p.m. My crew consisted of 3, me, Marquez, and a new guy named Dwyer, who'd transferred from Offutt. We managed maintenance on transmitter systems and monitored diagnostics from the command building. Things started getting strange on a Tuesday. Marquez and I were in the power control room checking battery arrays. Around 7:30, everything flickered. Not just the lights, the entire system. For half a second, every screen, every panel, even the fluorescent lights above us dimmed like during a brownout. Then everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Later, I pulled into Bay around 1:30 and checked into a small motel across from the gas station. The desk clerk gave me a weird look, said I appeared pale. I told him I'd had a long drive. In my room, I sat on the bed with the TV muted, trying to piece everything together. I didn't fall asleep until the sky lightened, and even then, it didn't feel like real sleep. I just turned the truck on for the first time, something that doesn't usually happen while driving. The logs showed nothing unusual, no power dip, no backup system activation. I checked with the operations desk, and they confirmed everything was normal. I initially dismissed it as a minor software glitch, but then it happened again, a brief flicker, barely a second long. This time, a radar diagnostic panel froze and required a manual reboot about 20 minutes later. Marquez and I exchanged a look. In our line of work, you don't raise alarms without good reason. We logged the events, carefully timestamping and noting the absence of system alerts. Wednesday night, I was conducting a routine physical check near the east dish panel. Bundled in my parka, clipboard and flashlight in hand, I was about 20 yards from the structure when something caught my eye in the snow. The recent light dusting hadn't obscured some unusual tracks. These weren't boot prints. They were strange, long, narrow, a curved shape like 2 elongated commas side by side. The impressions were shallow, arranged in a precise, tight zigzag pattern. They definitely didn't match any local wildlife, not moose, fox, or rabbit. The tracks led around the structure's corner, out of my view. Something made me hesitate to follow them. Thursday brought another oddity. 2 exterior cameras went dark simultaneously at 6:42 p.m., one facing the northeast field, the other on an old, unused tower. But they weren't truly offline. The feeds continued, just pitch black, as if the cameras were functioning but seeing nothing. Marquez and I attempted remote resets without success. We sent Dwyer out to investigate. He returned after 10 minutes, looking slightly unsettled. Both cameras were perfectly intact. Clean lenses, no frost, no damage, no obstructions. He kept emphasizing how clean the lenses were, which struck me as peculiar. My last shift was on a Friday, and I almost didn't go in. The thought of calling out sick crossed my mind, but I didn't want to end things that way. So I drove up to the station as darkness fell, parking and sitting in my truck for a while, staring at the sky. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, just the same stars I'd seen 100 times before. Inside, the station was quiet. Dwyer was in the diagnostic room watching the monitors, nodding when I entered but saying nothing. When I glanced at the screens, something caught my eye. On one of the live feeds, not one of the feeds that had gone black earlier in the week, there was a faint light flickering in the field beyond the fencing. It wasn't from the station, a dull white pulse that wasn't steady. It blinked twice, paused, then blinked again in a strange rhythm. No movement, no visible source, just this slow flash against the snow. I leaned closer, and it stopped. I asked Dwyer how long it had been happening. "I don't know, a few minutes," he said. I thought it might be a reflection. We watched for another 10 minutes, but nothing else appeared. I told Dwyer to stay put and went to check the systems myself. Everything was normal. No alerts, no surges, all logs clean. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not from the monitors, but from outside. I kept looking at the windows, half expecting to see someone standing there. Marquez never showed up that night. He texted just before 6:30 saying he wasn't feeling well. I didn't blame him. I left an hour early, not even finishing my shift. I packed up my gear, signed out, and drove home. The next morning, I called my supervisor and told him I wouldn't be coming back for my final day. I officially retired the following week. I've never spoken to Marquez or Dwyer since. I don't know if they ever saw anything else. I heard Dwyer didn't stay long. Someone told me he transferred out by spring. Something about that night felt wrong, like the air itself was hollow. I couldn't explain it to my wife when she asked what was bothering me. I just said I was stressed about wrapping things up, but that wasn't the truth. The silence that night was different. Not just quiet, but empty in a way I'd never experienced before. I was out on Lake Winfield fishing late one Saturday night, a routine I'd followed most weekends. The water was quiet, stars scattered overhead, with only my little boat lantern and occasional firefly flickers breaking the darkness. A calm wind kept the air just chilly enough to be comfortable. Benny, my border collie mix, was curled up at my feet, peaceful as always. Around midnight, something caught my eye while I was reeling in my line. A cluster of pale lights hovered just above the lake's surface, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the boat. These weren't like any boat lights or lanterns I'd seen before. They were soft, diffuse, and strangely, they didn't reflect on the water, as if the lake simply swallowed our glow. Even with a steady breeze and barely rippling water, the lights remained perfectly still. I blinked, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks. Benny's behavior added to my unease. He lifted his head and growled softly, which was unusual for him. Typically, he only got worked up around birds or raccoons. Half joking, I called out, "Hey, you folks lost or something?" No response came. The lights were a pale blue-white, eerie but not harsh, reminiscent of old glow sticks or massive bioluminescent bugs, yet too large and steady to be either. Something felt wrong. Not threatening exactly, but as if these lights were watching without wanting to be discovered. I thought about paddling closer, but hesitated. Now I live in a quiet place near North Pole, close to my grandkids. I keep things simple. At night, I'm cautious, always looking up first, a habit I've developed. I won't return to the lake, day or night. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. The cameras that were there never came back online after that night. They were eventually replaced, but no one ever determined what caused their failure. I grabbed The lake was dead calm that night, unnaturally so. I'd reached for my phone to capture the strange lights, but the battery was inexplicably drained. Even though I hadn't used it much that day, something felt off. Benny, my dog, was tense, his eyes fixed on those pale, steady lights hovering just above the water. Minutes passed, and I noticed something peculiar. Normally, even on the stillest night, you'd see the slightest ripple near something floating close to the surface. But here, the water was completely motionless, almost like it was trapped in a silent bubble beneath those lights. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were fishing buoys or floating flares, but no buoys emit such steady, pale light, and flares would drift with the wind. These didn't move at all. After about 15 minutes, the lights began to fade slowly, as if someone was gently turning down a dimmer switch. They didn't suddenly vanish or shoot away. They just gradually disappeared, leaving the lake in darkness. Benny relaxed and lay back down, but I remained unsettled, feeling cold despite the mild air. On our way back to the dock, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the lights to reappear. But nothing did. The night returned to its usual sounds, water lapping, frogs calling. The next day I asked other fishermen about what I'd seen. No one mentioned anything unusual. I even checked my phone's battery history, hoping for an explanation, but everything looked normal. By all accounts, I should have had plenty of charge left. Since that night, I've avoided that spot on the lake, especially after dark. Benny and I still fish during the day, but something about that experience lingers. Was it natural? Something else? I can't be sure. All I know is it wasn't like any fishing light or boat I've encountered before. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, but Benny's continued wariness around that part of the lake suggests otherwise. Something was there that night, quiet, still, just beyond understanding. A secret hovering just out of reach. The pre-dawn street was silent as I walked Baxter, our usual early morning routine. It was around 4 a.m. and the neighborhood lay quiet, with houses dark and curtains drawn. Just where the town's edge meets open darkness, we moved along the gravel path, my boots crunching softly and Baxter's nails clicking against the pavement. A crisp spring air surrounded us, sharp but not harsh. Baxter seemed more energetic than normal, tugging at the leash with an unusual mix of excitement and urgency. We were heading toward the small cluster of trees at the end of the cul-de-sac when something caught my attention overhead. 3 lights hung motionless in the sky, arranged in a perfect triangle. Hey, weren't like typical lights. No harsh glare of headlights or street lamps. Instead, these had a soft internal glow that seemed to pulse gently against the black backdrop. When I stopped walking, Baxter froze beside me, his body suddenly rigid and trembling. An unsettling sensation washed over me, as if the very air had grown thick with tension. I scanned the empty street, expecting to see something, another person, a vehicle, but there was nothing, just a faint rustle of leaves and a slight breeze. Baxter's ears were flat against his head, his eyes wide and locked on those strange lights. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a reflection, a new type of drone, or some radio tower configuration. But as I squinted, trying to discern any shape behind the lights, the sky remained an impenetrable black. Baxter remained completely still, uncharacteristically frozen. After what seemed like an eternity, the lights began to fade, disappearing as mysteriously as they had appeared. And just like that, the moment passed, leaving behind only a lingering sense that something extraordinary had just occurred. The night was quiet, just another routine flight from Salt Lake City to Winnemucca. My Cessna 182, an older model but well-maintained, had made this route countless times before. Around 10:15 p.m., I was cruising steadily at 9,500 feet, expecting nothing unusual. The air was smooth, visibility excellent despite the low moon. Something caught my eye, a faint glow off to the right. At first, I thought it might be a ground light from a ranch or vehicle, but it looked too high. Leaning closer to the window, I spotted 3 dim white lights arranged vertically, about 10 or 15 miles out. They weren't moving horizontally, just slowly rising in a perfectly straight line. I banked slightly to get a better angle, watching as the lights remained unchanged. Stars or reflections didn't make sense. They were too low, and their spacing stayed consistent. I flipped on the map light and double-checked the chart. Nothing. No towers, no airfields, no controlled airspace. I keyed the mic. Salt Lake Center. This is November 785. Mike Romeo, just checking. Hours later, in a quiet neighborhood, something similar unfolded. The lights faded slowly, like a dimmer switch being turned down. They weakened until they vanished completely, leaving only stars behind. Baxter, my dog, stood frozen, then finally relaxed. I unclenched my fingers on his leash. He looked up, confused, as if unable to comprehend what had just happened. Our walk continued, but the street felt different. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, like the world was holding its breath. Baxter stayed close, alert, and watchful. When we returned home, I checked the time. Just after 4:10 a.m., looking out the window, the sky appeared normal. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined everything, but Baxter's behavior told a different story. I haven't shared this with anyone. People say you should report strange lights to the authorities, but this felt different, quieter, stranger. I'm still searching for answers, left with only a vivid memory. 3 lights in a perfect triangle, hanging silently above a neighborhood not yet ready to wake. I was flying when something caught my eye. 4 lights, vertically stacked, climbing slowly. At first they seemed ordinary, but something felt off. I radioed Salt Lake Center. Traffic at 10, maybe 15 degrees left of my nose, climbing. Salt Lake responded quickly. Negative. You're the only radar return in this sector. Their confirmation should have reassured me, but it didn't. The lights were strange. 3 dim, steady white dots, not blinking like normal aircraft lights. No strobes, no navigation markers. Then a 4th light appeared below them, fading in smoothly without any sudden flare. I double-checked with Center. Hey, were you sure there are no weather balloons or tower lights? Their response was clear. Negative. No scheduled launches. No weather activity. By now, the lights had stopped rising, hanging around 5,000 feet above me. Too close to be stars. I banked slightly right to keep them in view, and something extraordinary happened. The entire vertical column of lights shifted horizontally, sliding westward with impossible smoothness. No rotation, no blinking, just a perfect, silent drift. Salt Lake, I reported. I have visual contact with 4 unidentified lights moving laterally. No strobes, no sound, no visible aircraft. Another pause. Then, 785 Mike Romeo, you're the only one out here. Do you want to declare an emergency? I said no. The lights held position briefly, then suddenly accelerated straight upward. Not a gradual increase, but an instant jump in speed, like shifting into a higher gear. Within seconds, they vanished into the cloudless sky. I can't explain what I saw, but something felt fundamentally wrong, like I was witnessing something I wasn't meant to see. The night sky was empty. Lights had shot up and vanished in seconds, not dimmed, not flickered, but completely gone. After staring at the spot for a long time, I realized Center wasn't saying anything. They seemed to be waiting for me to call back, but I didn't. The flight remained quiet, and I landed just after 11:30. The wind was calm, the hangar dark, no one was on the ground. I tied down the plane, got in my truck, and drove to the motel without unpacking. Strange details emerged the next morning. My solar Casio watch was 10 minutes behind, something it never does. My backup headset mic was partially unplugged and tucked under the seat, and my kneeboard, which I always clipped to my leg during flight, was on the passenger side floor. These weren't major issues, but something had shifted. I remembered checking the time before seeing the lights. I remembered clipping the board to my knee. I remembered coiling my headset cord like always. Yet something felt different. I've only shared this with one trusted pilot. He didn't laugh or try to explain. He just listened, nodded, and mentioned seeing odd lights in that same area more than once. I haven't flown that route at night since. Our camping trip was in late August, near the Black Rock Desert, just north of Reno. Days were hot, with a dry heat that didn't cling, and nights cooled quickly. My wife Heather, our kids Ellie and Josh, and I had taken a week off to explore somewhere more remote than typical campgrounds. We found a flat spot near a dry lake bed, close enough to the playa to walk out and stargaze without light pollution. No cell service, no other campers for miles. The nearest paved road was 40 minutes away. We set up camp in a sandy dip surrounded by sagebrush, using a 6-person dome tent, 2 folding tables, and a pop-up shade, anchoring everything with rocks. The first few nights were perfect. Vast skies, quiet evenings, maybe a distant coyote. We cooked on the camp stove, roasted marshmallows, played cards, a typical family camping experience. The night's wind had a peculiar quality that stuck with me long after our camping trip. Just after dinner, it picked up, not enough to damage the tent, but sufficient to make the walls flex slightly. We tightened the guidelines before bed, listening to the strange sound rushing over the lake bed. It wasn't loud exactly, but steady, like a low-pitched white noise, almost a hum. We settled in around 10. Heather and I positioned ourselves in the middle, with the kids on either side. The lantern was off, and stars peeked through the mesh overhead. I glanced at my watch before drifting off, noting the time, 1:17. Suddenly I was awake, not with a start, but smoothly, as if I'd barely been asleep. No grogginess, no stiffness, just alert. And the kids were still sleeping. Everything in the tent looked unchanged. Yet something felt off. When I sat up and looked around, I noticed the tent's main zipper was fully closed. Not just zipped, but with the pull tabs tucked outside. From inside, opening it would require reaching through the mesh sleeve to fish out the zipper handle. This wasn't how we'd left it. The wind had completely stopped. No sound, no movement, just absolute stillness. I reached for my watch and saw 2:46 a.m. Something didn't feel right. I sensed it was earlier, maybe around 12:30 or 1:00. I turned on the lantern, creating a soft glow. Heather stirred and asked what was wrong. I told her I wasn't sure, just that something felt weird. She sat up and checked her watch. 2:46 a.m., exactly. We both leaned over to check the kids' watches, which we'd placed on the gear bag between them. Each watch showed 2:46, precisely the same time, despite being purchased separately. The coincidence was unsettling. Night was quiet. We'd been camping at different spots, different times, different brands. Dust layered everything near the tent entrance. Strange scuff marks caught my eye. Not quite footprints, but shallow impressions that didn't match our own. They were too small for my feet, too large for Ellie's. I unzipped the tent flap. The moon hung low and orange, casting an odd light across our campsite. Something felt off. The landscape looked flat, almost unnaturally still. I studied the camp stove and realized something bizarre. No shadows. I moved my hand in front of me. Nothing. No shadow on the ground. Heather joined me, whispering to avoid waking the kids. She noticed it too, this strange shadowless landscape. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Complete silence surrounded us. No wind, no insects, no distant coyote calls. Just absolute quiet. Beyond the scrub brush, a faint glow hovered about 20 feet above the lake bed. It resembled a stadium light, but without any source. Just a pale, steady illumination, roughly the size of a car hood, suspended motionless in the air. We didn't move. We didn't speak. An instinctive sense told us to remain still, like sensing a large predator in darkness. Minutes passed. Slowly, the glow diminished until it vanished completely. Suddenly, wind rushed back, forceful and abrupt. Dust swirled against our legs. The brush rustled. We flinched, breaking whatever strange spell had held us. We retreated inside the tent, zipping it closed. My watch still read 2:46. Eventually, I lay back, staring through the mesh. The stars looked normal again. By morning, everything appeared unchanged. The weekend started like any other camping trip. I'd driven out from Lincoln, Nebraska, looking for a quiet escape from work and city noise. Just a few miles from a long-abandoned missile silo, I found a perfect clearing off a gravel road. Concrete bunkers and rusted fences were all that remained of the old military site, surrounded by an unsettling silence. I pulled my RV into the spot, set up my satellite dish, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful weekend of reading and maybe a short hike. The evening was clear, with a gentle breeze carrying a slight chill. Around 10 p.m., I checked my watch and prepared for bed. The first night seemed completely normal until just before 3 a.m., a deep, low hum began to vibrate through the entire camper. It wasn't particularly loud, but it felt almost physical, like the ground itself was resonating. I sat up, trying to identify the source. No machinery, no distant trucks, no engine sounds or headlights, just that persistent hum. At exactly 3 a.m., strange things started happening. My phone screen flickered, resetting to 12 a.m. for a brief moment before returning to the correct time. The camper's lights dimmed momentarily, and the radio burst into static before going silent and then returning to normal. When morning came, everything looked untouched. The campsite was fine. No animal tracks, no signs of disturbance. But our watches had all stopped, frozen at 2:46, despite the sun being high in the sky. We tried everything, tapping them, resetting, changing batteries, but nothing worked. Heather didn't want to discuss what had happened. The kids slept through everything, and we decided not to tell them. We packed up early and drove home in near silence. I still keep that watch in a drawer. It has never worked again. For 3 nights, something strange was happening around the abandoned missile silo near my RV. It started with a barely perceptible hum that seemed to pulse from underground, always intensifying just before 3 a.m. Each night the pattern was eerily consistent. My electronics began acting weird. Blank text files would mysteriously appear on my laptop, time-stamped precisely at 3:01 a.m. I'd delete them, but they'd return the next night. When I asked locals about these occurrences, no one else reported anything similar. The silo had been out of commission since the 1980s, with no nearby radio towers, power plants, or factories that might explain the phenomenon. On the 3rd night, I was prepared. Standing outside my RV with a flashlight, I watched the sky darken under thick, low clouds that obscured the stars. Around 2:55 a.m., a low vibration began, more a felt frequency than a sound. It wasn't mechanical, but something that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Toward the silo, a faint orange glow appeared along its top edge. It pulsed softly, though no moonlight could explain it, as the clouds completely blocked the sky. At exactly 3 a.m., the hum peaked and then abruptly stopped. Simultaneously, my electronics went haywire. The phone rebooted, the radio crackled into silence, and even the RV's control panel lights flickered. A moment of absolute quiet followed. Then the glow vanished, and the clouds seemed to momentarily part. I stood frozen, unable to process what I'd witnessed. The next morning revealed lingering oddities. My phone's battery had inexplicably drained by 20%, and the radio emitted a persistent, weak buzz that resisted all attempts to silence it. Another set of mysterious blank files had appeared on the laptop, continuing the pattern that defied explanation. The night started with a blank file time-stamped exactly at 3:01 a.m. I was camped about 30 miles west of Marfa, Texas on BLM land, just flat, dry country with scrub brush and hard pan dirt. After parking my truck off a 2-track road, an unsettling feeling began to grow. Something seemed to be watching from the silo or surrounding trees. The wind shifted oddly, carrying strange metallic smells like ozone or burnt wire. By the fourth night, curiosity drove me to record audio with my phone. I left it on the table, determined to stay awake past 3 a.m. The familiar hum returned, peaking precisely at 3 a.m. Beneath the vibration, I heard a faint clicking noise, steady and rhythmic, unlike anything natural. A mechanical heartbeat, perhaps. Glancing out the window, I caught a fleeting shadow near the silo's edge, vanishing the instant I blinked. Though tempted to leave, my curiosity won out. I'd read about military sites with strange electromagnetic fields, but nothing explained these experiences. On the fifth night, I left the camper door unlocked and stepped outside just before 3 a.m. The chilly night revealed a starless black sky. The hum grew louder, more intense, vibrating the air and creating a slight pressure in my ears. An orange glow pulsed softly around the silo's edge. At exactly 3 a.m., my watch and phone stopped for 10 full seconds. The radio died completely. No static, no sound. Control panel lights went dark before everything flickered back on and the glow vanished. I waited outside an other half hour, but nothing more occurred. The next morning, my electronics seemed normal. No strange files, no dead battery, no buzzing radio. I packed up and left before dark, looking back at the silo fading into the distance. Was this tied to the place or just an odd natural phenomenon? No explanation ever fit, and no one I spoke to had experienced anything similar. Even now, sometimes late at night, a faint hum lingers in the back of my mind. Not loud, but enough to make me look around, wondering if it's back or if I simply imagined the whole thing. Solo camping had always been my thing, especially out in the desert. This night was like so many others before. No cell service, no noise, no lights. My one-man tent with its mesh roof let me stargaze while I slept. I'd packed water, some food, and a satellite phone for emergencies. The evening started typical enough. Wind picked up around sundown, but died quickly after dark. I watched the sky, crystal clear with the Milky Way spread out above me. A couple of meteors streaked by early on. The silence was profound. I drifted off around 11, without a watch or powered-on phone. When I woke later, the darkness was absolute, the kind that seems to press against your eyeballs. Something felt off immediately. The stillness wasn't normal. No breeze, no rustling, no sounds at all. Desert nights always have some noise. An owl, a distant dog bark, something. But this, complete silence. Grabbing my flashlight, I unzipped the tent. The beam revealed something bizarre, a perfect 20-foot circle centered right on my campsite. The ground inside looked burned, scorched black. All vegetation was gone, replaced by bare, hard earth. But there was no heat, no smell. When I touched the ground, it was cold and packed tight. Standing up, I scanned the area. No tracks, no marks. My truck sat in the distance, untouched. The circle's edge was razor sharp, like someone had used a compass. Outside the ring, everything looked normal. Pale dirt, rocks, thorny brush. Inside, just that smooth, dark patch. Nothing made sense. A fire would have left traces, smoke, ash, something. But the night air was completely neutral. Just dry desert emptiness surrounding this impossible circle. The night was still in the desert. I'd been scanning the sky for what felt like hours, noticing nothing but unmoving stars. Something about the absolute stillness felt wrong, almost unnatural. Cold crept in, so I retreated to my tent and zipped it up. Sleep never came. I lay there with a flashlight, listening to the silence and watching the mesh ceiling. Near dawn, a faint humming caught my attention, deep and low, like a distant generator. It seemed to rise slightly, then fade away, not passing by but somehow diminishing. Then complete quiet returned. Morning revealed the strange circle remained. Its burn pattern looked artificial, too precise, as if stamped onto the ground. Without pausing for breakfast or coffee, I packed quickly and hiked back to my truck. Something compelled me to keep glancing behind me, though I couldn't explain why. At my truck, I checked the tires and sat for a few minutes, staring at the empty desert landscape. No vehicles, no tracks, just the familiar scrub and rocks. I drove straight to Alpine and found a cheap motel, spending 2 nights trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Later that week, I examined my gear. Everything appeared normal, no damage, no scorching, but my compass was slightly off. Checking it against my phone and a second compass confirmed something was different. The camping compass kept drifting, refusing to settle properly. I didn't report anything. Who would believe me? 3 weeks later, I returned during daylight just to look. The circle had vanished completely. Dry, cracked earth stretched out, with only a few green shoots breaking through the ground. The La bore the scars of fire, a stark emptiness where vegetation should have flourished. Where the blaze had swept through, nothing seemed to take root. The ground remained bare, as if the ecosystem had forgotten its own natural rhythm. This ring of desolation stood as a silent testament to the destructive power that had swept through, leaving behind a landscape that refused to heal or regenerate.